The following video and continued growth of this channel are made possible by your support over on patreon.com/616entertainment. Sign up today at any level you choose and help bring these brand new projects to life. Or if you're looking for a brand new t-shirt, maybe stop by prowrestlingtees.com/616entertainment. I got you covered. Founded in 1993, the Ultimate Fighting Championship was created to prove once and for all, in a fight with no rules and no weight classes, which martial art reigned supreme. Could a boxer beat a wrestler? Could a taekwondo or karate practitioner defeat a jiu-jitsu or judo specialist? Everyone wanted to know, and there was only one way to find out. This wasn't some stupid waste of time, could Superman beat Goku garbage. This was a real question, with a real answer waiting in the wings. For the first several years the UFC existed, it was clear that barely anybody knew what the hell was going on, including those locked inside the cage. At the very first event, boxer Art Jimerson famously battled Royce Gracie with one glove on. Times have changed, huh? Today, we all recognize the octagon, the setting for each and every UFC fight. But this cage wasn't always the plan. At one point, electrified fences were considered. The idea of a floating platform surrounded by a moat filled with alligators and sharks was even tossed out. And no, I'm not kidding. With as ridiculous as the Ultimate Fighting Championship was, and honestly still is sometimes, one had to wonder, when was there going to be a video game of this? It would take some time, a long time actually, but here in 2023, we're currently waiting for the official announcement of the 14th UFC video game. Over the next 6 months here on youtube.com/616entertainment, I'll take you through the entire account. Welcome to the History of UFC Video Games Part 1, as real as it gets. Oh, what's up, Dan-Dans? My name is Ian. I cannot wait to get to work here today. Covering the video games of the UFC is something I have wanted to do for a long time, but I had to wait until the timing was perfect. You know, this is something that you can only do one time. Now, today's video, part 1, is indeed going to focus on the original Ultimate Fighting Championship game, available on the Dreamcast, PlayStation, and the Gameboy Color. Part 2 will jump into the next generation on the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Part 3 will combine the Undisputed trilogy on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Part 4 won't feature any UFC games, but rather their competitors, which range from very, very good to very, very bad. And the big finale, Part 5, will close it out with the EA Sports era. Now, if you're on board with all that, or maybe you've been on board with some of the other stuff that I do around here, consider signing up over on patreon.com/616entertainment. Every new sign up is one step closer to unlocking a gigantic new video retrospective. Batman games, Ninja Turtles, Spider-Man, Grand Theft Auto, Metal Gear Solid, the history of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. You can help me put these videos together. I can't do it without you, so thanks for your help. No more plugging, no more promoting, let's get to it. This is the history of UFC video games. As previously stated, the UFC was founded in 1993. We're looking at 30 years of organized, high-level, mainstream mixed martial arts at this point. On one hand, it's crazy how young this sport is. On the other hand, as a longtime follower who has been a fan for about 20 years now, it's crazy how far it's all come. As a quick little background on me, the first UFC pay-per-view I was ever able to order was UFC 61, Bitter Rivals. As a kid who grew up a huge pro wrestling fan, it was absolutely Ken Shamrock who caught my attention for mixed martial arts. He was a wrestling guy, you know? I knew him. I watched him kick ass in a performance art environment. I kind of wanted to watch him kick ass for real. If you're watching this and you're a wrestling fan who isn't into the UFC or MMA in general, look at it like this. You might not care about the Suicide Squad, but when you hear John Cena is in it and he's awesome as this DC Comics character Peacemaker, you go, man, I kinda wanna watch John Cena shoot some people. It's the same thing. Okay, maybe it's not the same thing, but it's similar. I knew from pro wrestling that Ken Shamrock was a legit fighter. I specifically recall my dad knowing who he was and telling me he was an absolute destroyer. By the time I became a fan of mixed martial arts, it was 2004. The Ultimate Fighter was on Spike TV, it came on right after Monday Night Raw, and the main event of the big finale show was Ken Shamrock versus Rich Franklin. At this point, Ken Shamrock was no longer the destroyer I'd heard about. He was no longer the world's most dangerous man. He was far, far past his prime. This guy Rich Franklin, a dude I'd never heard of, beat Ken down fairly easily, finishing him just past the 2-minute mark of the very first round. I learned several things that day, with one of the biggest takeaways being that MMA and pro wrestling are not created equal. If this were WrestleMania, the old legend would have turned away the young, hungry lion in triumphant fashion, and we all would have cheered our hearts out. But this wasn't WrestleMania. This was real life. And in real life, the old guard are often sacrificed to the next generation. Remember my first pay-per-view, UFC 61, Bitter Rivals? One of the headlining attractions was Ken Shamrock versus Tito Ortiz 2. A blood feud rematch. Tito flattened Ken 78 seconds into the fight. Shamrock protested the stoppage, and 3 months later, a trilogy fight took place. Ortiz left zero doubt, demolishing Shamrock in 2 minutes and 23 seconds, and absolutely breaking my heart. I'm telling you all this to set the scene. This sport comes with the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And the video games based on this great sport are no different. Now, the Ultimate Fighting Championship may have been founded in 1993, but I was not exaggerating when I stated that it would take quite a while for the company to receive its first video game adaptation. And I realize you want to hear about the UFC's video games today. You're not here for an in-depth history lesson on the company itself, but long story short, the UFC was not making money for a long time. It was constantly hemorrhaging cash, and unlike the professional fighting landscape, there's no cut man for your financials. There's no quick fix coagulant that somebody can plug into your wallet. Putting a video game together is unlike producing any other type of merchandise. You can't develop a game as quickly as you can print a t-shirt or a poster. And many great opportunities were missed. With no merchandising partners and really not much financial success to speak of at all, we never got a game of the UFC's early years. Can you imagine a UFC game with Hoist Gracie, Dan Severn, Art Jimerson, and Ken Shamrock on the Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis? We've got WWF Royal Rumble from that era, WCW Super Brawl Wrestling. On the boxing side of things, we had Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and its Super Nintendo sequel. George Foreman and Buster Douglas had their own games, so on and so forth. But the stars did not align in the right formation, and a 16-bit UFC game never came to fruition. 7 years after the company was founded, its first video game would hit store shelves. Simply titled Ultimate Fighting Championship, the game was developed initially for and would release first on Sega's Dreamcast console, with Anchor Inc. at the helm. If Anchor Inc. is a familiar name to you, you've either played Toy Fighter in arcades, or you just recently watched my Triangle X Squared Circle retrospective on WWF Raw, where I wrote damn near the same script for this section. Anchor Inc. was brought together by Tekken alumni Masahiro Onoguchi, and with 3D fighting games being the man's bread and butter, it would seem that a transition into the realm of mixed martial arts gaming might be an easy one to make. It's worth noting that I'll be covering the PlayStation version of the game in today's video, because that's the version I own, and that's the one I have experience with. I've never owned a Dreamcast in my life, and growing up, only one of my friends had a Dreamcast, so I can't speak to this iteration with any authority. The PlayStation port was handled by Opus, most famous for their work on Half Minute Hero and Beat Planet. Or Fighter's Destiny. I don't know what the hell you know them for. What, I gotta go through their entire resume? The Dreamcast release from Anchor Inc. is unmistakably the superior version. You can tell by looking at them side by side, or you can compare reviews, whichever you prefer. The Dreamcast version looks much better, it runs much better, it plays much better, and that's all there is to it. If you're waiting for but the PlayStation version has this, that's not coming, so don't hold your breath. We're about to dive into the gameplay, the presentation, the full package. And I just want to state this at the top. I don't want to dangle a carrot at the end of the stick. This is not a good game. Now, the Sega Dreamcast version is the best version that was made. It was much more reminiscent of the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube versions that we'll cover next time out. But the PS1 port, yeah, not the best. Presentation is important, right? And presentation, honestly, is the high point of this game. Check out the entrances, the stage, the walkway. We've got entrance music. I mean, everyone's entrance music is the same, and there's only one stage in the entire game, but it's something, right? A much better game from this time period would be WWF SmackDown 2. And pro wrestling is much more dependent on its theatrics. But SmackDown 2's entrances suck. There's no stage, no ramp, no audience. UFC wins out here. Not by much, but it does. Another high point comes in the shape of the legendary voice of the Octagon, Bruce Buffer, who delivers full introductions for each fighter before the bell rings.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to begin
Referee Big John McCarthy is right there in the cage to keep an eye on the action, and his trademark catchphrase kickstarts every showdown.
Are you ready? Are you ready? Well, let's get it on!
Between rounds, the Octagon girls parade around the cage. The blood flying from a fighter's face after taking considerable damage is an awesome detail. And that's about it when it comes to positives, unfortunately. I wish that weren't the case, but it is what it is. Maybe I'll find something else, I'll stumble across something else that I want to put over as this video rolls on, but as it stands, I'm all out of things to brag about. It's time to take an in-depth look at the gameplay, and that unfortunately comes with taking a turn into the negative. I don't want to try to teach you how to play the game. This is a retrospective, not a tutorial. But the fact of the matter is this. This game makes you feel like you cannot move. You know how you can't throw punches in your dreams, or all of your movements are really slow, like you're underwater? That's what Ultimate Fighting Championship on the PlayStation feels like. And I stress, this is what it feels like on PlayStation. Here's some Dreamcast footage. See how smooth it is? See how much nicer it looks? But we didn't have this. We had this. And when I say we, I'm talking about the kids who grew up with a PlayStation, which I and many others did. In the grand scheme, the Sega Dreamcast sold just over 30 million units. The PlayStation sold over 102 million units. And I understand that there may be a contingent of the audience that are upset that I'm not covering the superior version of the game, but I have to tell my stories. I can't make things up for convenience. So yeah, I, and many others, our only option was this. And it sucks. According to the instruction manual, shooting a takedown is triggered by pressing square and triangle at the same time, but I cannot get it to work at all. And hold on, square and triangle? How many games in existence have ever asked the player to press square and triangle at the same time? Not many, and for good reason. Later games in the series would change this. I wonder why. There's really no strategy involved in any fight. It's senseless. It's rock'em sock'em stupidity. In Mortal Kombat, you've got special moves you can pull off, but you gotta be careful to avoid your opponent's specials as well. In wrestling games, you've often got to deal with speed differentials, or maybe you've got to stay aware whether your opponent has a finisher from the standing position or the top rope. In this game, there's nothing. There's really no difference in the way anybody fights. Chuck Liddell, known for his heavy hands and knockout power, will take you down and submit you the same way Frank Shamrock would. There's no stamina meter either, so it's not like you can work on sapping the other guy's gas tank before looking for a choke. No. Just attempt to choke 15 or 16 times and maybe eventually you'll get it. Or maybe you'll get him the first time, who knows. In my experience, it is extremely rare for a fight in this game to end on the feet with a knockout. And by that, I mean in the several hours of gameplay I captured, it did not happen one time. So I don't even have footage to show you. A submission or knockout from the mounted position is how 95% of your fights are going to end. Why are so many orthodox fighters standing southpaw in this game? Why are there no weight classes? This game was released in 2000. The UFC introduced weight classes in 1997. There are 22 fighters on the roster of all shapes and sizes, and man, 22 is not a lot. Again, comparing to similar games of the time, WWF SmackDown 2 featured 66 playable wrestlers. And not only is it small, but Ultimate Fighting Championship's 22 fighter roster isn't exactly an all-star lineup. We've got Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Mark Coleman, Evan Tanner, Bas Rutten, and other big names of the time. But Andre Roberts? I mean no disrespect to the man himself, it's just like, we don't have Jens Pulver or Tank Abbott or Vitor Belfort, but we have Andre Roberts? The game itself is more disrespectful to him than I am. Under his strengths, they've listed claims improved stamina. Claims! Like, hey, we don't even believe him, but he says he's in better shape. Yeah, right. Wow. Look at the fighters' bodies. Look at Jeremy Horn. This barely resembles a human being. Look at his legs and feet in comparison to the rest of him. Look at Chuck Liddell's head. Gary Goodridge looks pretty good. He's even got his Superman tattoo on his right arm, which is interesting. I don't know how they got away with that, but good lord, most of these guys look oblong and ghoulish. Now, I know that was pretty harsh, but like I always say, this is a retrospective. I'm not trying to put together a commercial to sell you on this game. I'm just calling it like it is. The gameplay sucks. The representations of the fighters are straight up pitiful. But hey, you could always create your own fighter and try out some design work for yourself. I threw my own guy together to see if he felt any different, and no, he doesn't. If anything, I think I'm just surprised there's a creative fighter mode at all. But even though he plays the same as everyone else does, who cares? Let's look at the ins and outs of this mode. Dan Buttman is his name, and when it comes to his strengths, I'd like to think these were made up by his bum-ass manager or something. Hey, what's he good at? Aw, listen! Strength over techniques. Some submission, good submission. Look at some of the fighting styles we can assign to our guy. Sumo? Ninjutsu? Ridiculous. By the time this game released, it represented a UFC that no longer existed. It was late to the party, and when it finally arrived, it was wearing a Halloween costume in December. Hey, what the hell is with this game's startup having a silent screen that just reads, "Fight like a man"? What is that? Fight like a man? As opposed to what? A robot? An animal? Whatever. Now, we've been talking about the PlayStation version of Ultimate Fighting Championship up to this point, but like I mentioned earlier, there is a third port of the game on Gameboy Color. Thanks to longtime Dan Mr. Beef, I now have a Super Nintendo and a Super Game Boy. I went on eBay and bought a Game Boy Color copy of Ultimate Fighting Championship specifically to cover it for you here today, and it doesn't work. I did not know that Game Boy Color games don't work with Super Game Boy. So that was $15 right down the toilet. But look, the Game Boy Color port was developed by Fluid Studios, the team behind Army Men, Air Combat, and the 2001 E.T. game. This version reviewed terribly, as you might imagine. I cannot lend any personal stories to this portion of the video for obvious reasons, but I tried my best. I guess I'll just have to use this Super Game Boy for something else. When it came down to it, the critical reception to the UFC's first video game depended on where you played it. If you owned a Dreamcast, you know, the more powerful, more advanced hardware, you were riding pretty high, and this was a fairly impressive first outing. PlayStation owners were not so lucky, with heavy, unresponsive controls and ugly graphics ruining the overall package. And Game Boy Color players, I mean, nobody bought this game on Game Boy Color. What are we talking about? Going forward, the UFC itself would continue to evolve, as would their video game offerings. It would not be another 7-year wait for a follow-up. No, no, no. From 2002 to 2004, the UFC would release 4 more games across the next generation of consoles. What would the Octagon look and feel like on the Xbox, GameCube, and PlayStation 2? Hey, we'll talk all about it next time. Oh, there it is. Thank you for joining me for the history of UFC video games Part 1, as real as it gets. Now, I understand that this initial entry ranges from impressive to repulsive, but we're only heading up from here. This entire history of Retrospective series is not going to be all negative, I assure you. If you like this video and you want to see me go in depth on other classics like the Grand Theft Auto series, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Spider-Man games, Batman games, and more, you can help bring those videos to life by signing up at any level over on patreon.com/616entertainment. These are videos that will not be produced without your support. So if there's something on screen that you are interested in, don't waste any time signing up for as little as $2 a month, and I will get to work. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and I hope to see you next time out for the history of UFC video games Part 2, Face the Pain. Until then, I love ya, and I will see you next time. In Part 1 of the history of UFC video games, we took a look at where it all began. The Sega Dreamcast release of Ultimate Fighting Championship was certainly the way to play, though the inferior PlayStation port was definitely more readily available. We're just gonna gloss over the Game Boy Color release. But that was then. In the years to come, the UFC evolved, with grander entrances, more animated athletes inside the cage, and bigger names to capture the imaginations of the audience. The sport of mixed martial arts, while still in its infancy, had indeed moved beyond the crawling stages. And with the passage of time came the expansion of technology. The Sega Dreamcast was discontinued within 2 years of its North American launch. The PlayStation was now on its last legs, quietly performing in the shadow of the brand new PlayStation 2. Nintendo's GameCube and Microsoft's Xbox were also alive on the scene. These 3 consoles were powering a new generation of gaming. A generation that the Ultimate Fighting Championship did not intend to miss. On today's installment of the history of UFC video games, we'll dive deep into this generation's MMA offerings. Would the quality bar be raised high enough to match the technological one? There's only one way to find out. Oh, what's up, Dan-Dans? My name is Ian. Welcome to the history of UFC video games Part 2, Face the Pain. Now, you heard me at the top. Today, we are going to take a look at the next generation of UFC video games. Now, there are 4 of them, and they are all very, very similar. Almost Madden-ish in a way. So, each of these games definitely don't need their own 20-minute chunk. So here's what I'm thinking. We're going to take a look at Throwdown and Sudden Impact on the PlayStation 2, and we'll close things out with Tapout 2 on the Xbox. Sounds about right, wouldn't you say? If you're on board with that, maybe you'd be on board with signing up over on patreon.com/616entertainment at any level you choose. Every new supporter brings us one step closer to the next big goal, which at the time that I'm recording this is an in-depth retrospective of Grand Theft Auto Vice City. And now, without further ado, let's get to it. In the first installment of this series, I went into detail on how the UFC had been up and running for over 7 years before their first video game hit store shelves. Luckily, for fans of the sport, such a gap would never be seen again. Just about a year and a half after the release of the original title on the Dreamcast and PS1, we'd get UFC Tapout and UFC Throwdown, with Tapout exclusive to the Xbox and Throwdown exclusive to the PlayStation 2. Again, these games are very, very similar, so we're going to spend our time focusing on Throwdown. Let's get this out of the way right off the bat. It didn't matter which console you owned. You were in luck. Either of these games could be considered the new standard, the best UFC games ever made. Now that's not saying much. The original entry was just fine. Nothing that would blow anyone away, but this was progress. Throwdown benefits greatly from the generational leap, running so much smoother than its older brother on the PS1. One of my favorite improvements is moving takedowns and submissions away from the combinations of square and triangle and X and circle, bringing them instead to square and X and triangle and circle. This is so much more natural. The roster has expanded as well, with a stronger focus on lighter weight fighters, which adds a degree of separation when it comes to playstyle and overall feel. The smaller guys are faster. We've got these weird entrances that are comprised of a strange hybrid of live, in-engine characters against pre-rendered backgrounds. This kind of reminds me of Fire Pro Returns. Man, what a game that was. But that's another tale for another time. UFC Throwdown was developed by Opus. Yes, indeed, the very same team that produced the PlayStation 1 iteration of the game. So, being that we've already covered their origin, there's really no need to do it again. Did you miss part 1? The link is in the description. Go back and watch it. But having all of those beginnings and origin stories out of the way means we can dive right into the action. The gameplay, the good, the bad, the fun stuff. Let's take a look at the new modes. What does any sports game absolutely need? If you audibly spoke the words, a career mode, at the screen, then yeah, you nailed it. UFC Throwdown does indeed contain its very own career mode, where we are tasked with creating our own fighter and leveling him up, little by little. We pick whichever fighting style we're interested in and get to work. I've chosen pro wrestling because I'm not taking this seriously, and some footage of a luchador inside the octagon is funny. Did you know that professional pile of shit Alberto Del Rio was once an MMA fighter? Thank you, Mirko Krokop. My boy Rang Dipkin here is a zone theory specialist, achieving a top rank of Plane 8, well versed in nude horseplay. Try and stop him, alright? Skill challenges improve our attributes, we battle sparring partners, and then we enter tournaments. Rang Dipkin won his first tournament, scoring killer KOs over gigantic jabronis and slick submissions over smaller strikers. That right there is a champion. And that is where I stopped playing career mode because that's it. It's just this 5 times over and over, learning new moves and new fighting styles, and there's just not a ton of meat on the bone. It's something, it's progress over the original, but yeah, it's nothing special. There are more new modes on top of career though. UFC mode is a bit of a strange name. You might be wondering what the hell that means, so I'll explain. You pick a fighter from whichever division you prefer, be it a big boy or a small boy, and you run through a number of opponents. Your 5th fight is for the title. Finishing this mode grants the Silver Championship, and completing it a second time earns you the Gold. Arcade mode is kind of the same thing without the bells and whistles of the silver and gold belts. It's just a series of fights like any fighting game would have. Are these two modes practically the same thing? Yes. Was Opus trying to pad out UFC Throwdown's features list to brag about on the box? I'd say so. And speaking of the box, check out the cover art, which features Tito Ortiz delivering a devastating knee to the chin of Charles Mask Lewis. Mask was not an MMA fighter himself, but the co-founder of the Tapout clothing brand, and his likeness was featured on the cover of every single game we'll be looking at here today. His contribution to the world of mixed martial arts was sizable, and obviously, he was well respected in the industry. Unfortunately, I don't get to close out this portion of the video with great news, as Mask was killed in a car accident in 2009 at just 45 years old. Shortly after his passing, he was entered into the UFC Hall of Fame, and to this day, his name adorns the octagon at every single UFC event. Hats off to you, Mask. And now with that nice little tribute out of the way, what do you say we get a little stupid? Take a look at some of the weird, unimpressive, downright strange portions of UFC Throwdown. Listen to the introduction of Carlos Newton. Tell me what he specializes in.
He is an expert in Dragon Ball Z Jiu-Jitsu.
Good lord. And you thought Zone Theory Plane 8 nude horseplay was ridiculous. Chuck Liddell's head is still gigantic for some reason. Forget the Iceman, they should be calling Liddell Mr. Mount Rushmore with that noggin. Josh Barnett is known as the baby-faced assassin in real life, but in this game, he looks like 30 miles of bad road. Here's a couple photographs of UFC legend BJ Penn. Here's BJ in the game. What? Who is this? I swear this looks like it was supposed to be someone else, and they just changed it to BJ at the last second. Why is everyone still fighting Southpaw? This was a ridiculous oversight in the first game, but to see it repeated here in the follow-up, it's unreal. But let's flip the script. There has to be a few nice little details we can appreciate, right? How about the fighter-specific signs in the crowd? That's pretty cool. Several times during my gameplay capture, I popped huge for some top-tier animations. Frank Shamrock hit a scissor sweep on Evan Tanner I've never seen in the years that I've played this game. Nothing could touch seeing an in-game recreation of Gary Goodridge's infamous crucifix elbow KO of Paul Herrera, though. Here's the original. And here's what I pulled off in the game. Are you nuts? I could not believe my eyes. It was another move I'd never seen before. I'm so happy I was recording. UFC Throwdown released on June 5th, 2002, and scored much better reviews than its PS1 predecessor. The title was lauded for its expanded gameplay options, but was not free from criticism, with pundits not shying away from the fact that somehow, in some ways, the Dreamcast version was still more appealing to the eye. But with over 300,000 copies sold, Throwdown became the best-selling title in the company's history. And you know what that means. When there's money to be made, there are products to be sold. I mentioned in part 1 of this series that the UFC wasn't setting the merchandising world on fire at any point, and that was partially because, the company wasn't making any money. And those financial issues continued to worsen as the years went on. In late 2000, the UFC's parent company, SEG, were nearly finished. Bankruptcy was on the horizon, with the knockout blow closing in each passing day. In January of 2001, SEG would sell the UFC to Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta, along with their business partner, Dana White. The Fertittas were not big players in the fight game. In fact, they weren't players at all. They owned and operated Stations casinos, but these two things are not the same. With the UFC now under the ownership of the Fertittas with White in place as president, we had entered the Zuffa era. We'll make this quick. I know you came here for the games, not the overall company itself. But the Zuffa era did not lead to an instant turnaround. The UFC continued to hemorrhage cash, but every once in a while, there was a beautiful little band-aid to plug the wound. In 2002, the UFC 37.5 main event clash between Chuck Liddell and Vitor Belfort would make history as the first MMA fight to ever air on cable television. In November of 2002, UFC 40 Vendetta was main evented by Tito Ortiz versus Ken Shamrock. This show would become one of the biggest pay-per-views in company history. Live in the building, over 13,000 tickets were sold. This was something. The wounds weren't stitched shut, the bleeding hadn't fully stopped, but this was something. It was something to hold on to. Another little something to hold on to would be the sequel to Throwdown, UFC Sudden Impact, which released just a hair shy of 2 years later in April of 2004. Sudden Impact would once again be an incremental improvement. Nothing major, not a from the ground up revitalization, just a small step forward. Let's take a look. Let me tell you something. I love that Sudden Impact introduces new canvases for the Octagon. I don't know if it's just me, but oh my goodness gracious, what a difference this makes. Visual variety goes a long way for me. On the variety front, we've also got lots of brand new entrance music, none of which I can play for you now, but just know, it's there. I'm a big fan of the lasers and whatnot that really bolstered the theatrics of the entrances. This was at a time that the real-life UFC was doing the same thing, with an entrance ramp and fog, the whole deal. The blood flies here in Sudden Impact, way more than before. And not only does the blood fly, but we've got visual damage on the fighters that remains and even worsens as more damage is done. The gameplay overall is even smoother than Throwdown, and the blows have never been more impactful. The cage itself is now interactive as well, which, it's amazing that it took 3 games for this to be a thing. Fighters have been using the cage walls to set up takedowns for over 10 years at this point. Come on now. I'll tell you what really popped me was getting knocked out by Shoney Carter with the exact same spinning back fist that he used to knock out Matt Serra. Come on, that is fantastic. It's also interesting that Sudden Impact features the first female fighter in a UFC game, and really, the first female representation inside the cage ever in Erica Montoya. This was 2004, man. The UFC wouldn't have its first female fight for another 9 years. Hell, all the way into 2011. Dana White was quoted as saying women would never fight in the UFC. Shout out to Erica Montoya, a forgotten footnote in UFC history. Now, we've had UFC mode, we've had career mode, we've had all these things, but we've never had a story mode. Until now. Yes, sir, UFC Sudden Impact does indeed feature a story mode. Now, you might be wondering how a UFC game could possibly feature a story mode, and that's a good thing if you're wondering that, because I'm about to tell you. Well, once again, we're creating a fighter. This time, we're stepping into the shoes of Casey Tatum. Another reference that I doubt anyone watching this will understand. Anyway, we've been discovered by a trainer. This guy sees our potential as an undefeated street fighter. And how about it here? Cutscenes, dialogue. Sure, it's text dialogue with no voiceovers, but still, this is new. This trainer knows we can make it in the big time as long as we choose the right gym, which is indeed up to us, and we've got to put in the work. And by that I mean we're doing practically the exact same skill exercises we had in UFC Throwdown. I swear the loading screens are sometimes upwards of 10 seconds long for a training exercise that looks like this.
Are you ready? Well, let's get it on, guys!
It's so stupid, it's hilarious. After training and pressing this wheel of XP for 6 months of in-game time, you know how many fights I had? 0. None. Story mode ends with your fighter reaching the UFC. The entire mode is this, what you've been seeing on screen. Story mode sucks. It's completely worthless. There is nothing here. In fact, I would say Sudden Impact Story mode is a step back from Throwdown's Career mode, because at least in Career mode I was fighting in tournaments. Here in Sudden Impact, there's nothing to do outside of the training exercises. Sudden Impact also features a new mode called Champion Road, which is basically a carbon copy of Throwdown's UFC mode. And if at this point you are recognizing a lot of rearranging when it comes to game modes and not actual evolution, then you're pretty observant. The gameplay here in Sudden Impact is smoother. Overall, it's better, but as far as these game modes are concerned, there's nothing to really see. You know what I love? The fighter profiles. And this is just the hardcore MMA fan in me. I'm a big stats guy. I spent years obsessed studying the win-loss records and fight histories of so many athletes. And coming back to this, it's like stepping into a time machine. UFC legend Andrei Arlovski makes his first playable appearance here in Sudden Impact. And at the time this game was released, his MMA record was 5-3. Today, at 44 years old, still an active competitor on the UFC roster, Andrei Arlovski holds a record of 34, 22, 0-2, making him one of the most prolific fighters in the company's history. Also, what the hell, how did it take me so long to talk about the fact that I can finally play as Ken Shamrock? And yes, I punished Tito Ortiz for his sins. Those sins being beating Ken Shamrock. If your fight goes to decision in this game, prepare to see the worst judging in combat sports video game history. You think today's games are bad? Sudden Impact doesn't even understand the concept of the 10-point must system. These scores are senseless. I think they're random, to be honest with you. These scores actually equate to a majority draw, too, but whatever, I guess just give him the decision win. But maybe these scores are no more ridiculous than fighting as unlockable characters like Dana White and the Fertitta brothers. What the hell do I know? UFC Sudden Impact's review scores were about the same as Throwdown. It wasn't buried or anything, but it sold far, far worse, moving less than 200,000 copies worldwide. Sudden Impact wouldn't just close the book for the UFC on the PlayStation 2, it had also closed the book on the UFC with Opus. With 3 games inside of 4 years, you wish Opus would have really gotten to work. You wish they would have done more than ever so slightly tweak the formula with each new installment, but they didn't. After this, the UFC would wind up with a whole new developer and publisher, but that's a part 3 conversation. What we haven't done today, and this will be our last stop for part 2, is talk about the Xbox. UFC Tapout released in February of 2002, right along with Throwdown, and they were like brothers. Very similar. Not quite Pokemon Red and Blue levels of similar, but pretty damn similar, to say the least. That's why I skipped it entirely. We are going to jump straight into UFC Tapout 2, which dropped the following year, in 2003. The Xbox titles were not made by Opus, no. These were developed by Dream Factory, the team behind the Tobal games and Ehrgeiz, the strange, often forgotten Final Fantasy fighter. UFC Tapout 2's graphics are strange. They might be the best yet. As a matter of fact, they probably are. I love the spotlights panning across the extremely lively audience. But what is with the colors? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Why is Tapout 2 so gray? I don't know, man. The colors just look off. The career mode is the same old thing. There's nothing new here. But what I really enjoy is that my new fighter, Targus.
Your wife's new legal name is Targus. Is this okay? No.
Won his first contest with these horrific knees to the head from the side mount. If you're unaware, knees to the head of a grounded opponent are illegal in the UFC. They were at the time that Tapout 2 released, and they still are to this day. So what the hell is going on here? The greatest strength of each UFC game thus far has been the presentation. And Tapout 2, for some reason, completely cuts out the presentation aspect. Tail of the tape? Gone. Entrances? Completely gone. I don't understand this. And if I've got one more issue, it's a major one. The Xbox titles never adjusted the controls. Takedowns and submissions are still launched by pressing the combinations of square and triangle or X and circle together. Or X and Y and A and B together. You know what I mean. It's horrendous, man. Terrible combinations to have to press together so often. UFC Tapout 2 reviewed about as well as Throwdown and Sudden Impact, but its sales were far below, selling a little over 100,000 copies. Much like Opus and the PlayStation 2, this would be Dream Factory's final attempt, as well as the final UFC game released on the Xbox. Some time would pass, but eventually, the team of Yukes and THQ would ink a deal with the Ultimate Fighting Championship, leading to the Undisputed series, a trilogy of titles that many believe are still the greatest UFC video games ever made. And we'll talk all about them next time. Oh, there it is. Thank you very much for joining me here today for this, the History of UFC Video Games Part 2, Face the Pain. Goodness gracious, I cannot wait for Part 3, where we are going to dive deep into the Undisputed Era. I'm not joking when I say that is the installment I am most looking forward to with this series. If you enjoyed this video, please consider signing up over on patreon.com/616entertainment at any level you choose. I'm a one-man crew. I do all of this myself, and it's fair to say that it's a lot of work. So if you want to support me, I would greatly appreciate it. If not, it's not the end of the world. Thank you for watching either way. Dan, I love ya, and I will see you next time. The year is 2005. Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar are going to war in the finals of the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, the UFC's brand new reality show. At its peak, this brutal, bloody showdown was viewed by more than 10 million people around the world. Nobody knew it at the time, but this was the beginning of a brand new era. The UFC's popularity would explode into the mainstream, and with it would come a whole new world of merchandise. T-shirts on store shelves, action figures of Frank Mir and Brock Lesnar, replica championship belts, your very own UFC gloves, and, in a few years' time, a brand new series of video games. This is what MMA fans around the world had been waiting for. What's up, Dan-Dans? My name is Ian. Thank you for joining me for another installment of the history of UFC video games. Look, the Dreamcast, Gameboy Color, PS1, PS2, Xbox, GameCube, old news. Developer Anchor Inc., Opus, gone. When I say we're entering a new era, that's the real deal. We have 3 games to cover here today, and it's important to walk down the road that brought us to this point. So I don't want to waste too much time, but I will simply throw out that patreon.com/616entertainment is where you can go to support me and my work. I do all of this myself. I write these videos, shoot them, edit them, capture the gameplay. I do all of it myself. And every new sign up over on Patreon brings us closer to the next in-depth retrospective. On deck right now is Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Oh my goodness, I want to make that one. Let's hit that mark. And with that, let's get to it. Welcome to the History of UFC Video Games Part 3, the Undisputed Era. In 2005, when the Ultimate Fighter changed the MMA world, the UFC didn't have a new video game to release alongside the newfound popularity. In 2006, when Chuck Liddell vs. Tito Ortiz 2 pulled in more than 1 million buys on pay-per-view, the UFC didn't have a new video game to release alongside the monstrous event. Now, it should be noted, the company didn't just give up on the gaming front. It's not like they weren't interested in making more games. They just weren't interested in continuing to work with their previous partners. And I mean, could you blame them? After releasing 5 games across 5 years, none of them really accomplished anything more than a slight upgrade to the most basic of features. To really make a splash, to really take things to the next level, the Ultimate Fighting Championship needed a new partner. A partner who could change the game completely. A partner who could finally offer a video game experience equal to the excitement of an actual UFC event. Why bother dragging this out? In January of 2007, that partner was found as the UFC signed a brand new deal with THQ, the prolific publisher behind the Red Faction series, plenty of Power Rangers titles, games for The Simpsons, SpongeBob, Destroy All Humans, and most notably, both WCW and the WWF, or WWE at this point. In 2007, THQ were a force. They were everywhere. We're talking about an industry leader here, Dan. But THQ were in place to publish the game, not develop it. Stepping in to craft this brand new experience from the ground up would be Yukes, a team you may have heard me talk about 100 or 200 times on this channel. Yukes were the architects of some of the greatest pro wrestling video games ever made. From SmackDown titles like Shut Your Mouth and Here Comes the Pain, to GameCube exclusives like WrestleMania 19 and Day of Reckoning. Again, we're not talking about a ragtag group of goons. This was a tried and true, battle-tested, highly successful developer in the sports/fighting genre. The days of this were long gone. At E3 2007, the world would receive their first taste of what was to come. THQ and Yukes would offer a supreme demonstration of UFC 2009 Undisputed. Though the trailer did not feature gameplay or any in-engine footage whatsoever, even in a pre-rendered CG format, this was promising. Seeing Chuck Liddell and Rampage Jackson landing their trademark strikes, hearing the booming impact of each blow, goodness gracious. I'm a firm believer of no gameplay equals no hype, but this was different. This was the first time any UFC video game actually resembled the sport it was based on. Wishful thinking? Maybe. But coming from where we'd been in the past, this was something. 1 year later, in June of 2008, the first gameplay was revealed when, to hype their upcoming light heavyweight championship fight, Quinton Rampage Jackson and Forrest Griffin went head-to-head in the digital realm. When I tell you this footage had me bouncing off the walls, I mean it. I needed UFC 2009 Undisputed, and I needed it right now. I was having dreams about this game. I'm serious. I was falling asleep at night, and then the next thing I knew, I was walking into a 7-Eleven, and the guy behind the register had a demo unit set up. I played the game. It was great. I never questioned what was going on. Although I probably should have, because obviously none of it was real. It was a dream. That is hype. That is anticipation. That is probably a little concerning in hindsight. I don't know, have you guys ever dreamt about something that you were really looking forward to? Maybe specifically a video game? If so, please tell me down in the comments. Let me know I'm not alone. Let's get into the gameplay, because there's a lot to say. First off, each fighter has two styles, a striking and a grappling specialty. Somebody like BJ Penn will focus on boxing and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, whereas a George St. Pierre is a kickboxer wrestler. Each archetype has its own special techniques. For instance, Jiu-Jitsu fighters can lock up a rubber guard. Wrestlers have slams in their repertoire. Muay Thai practitioners like Anderson Silva have a clinch that should not be trifled with. In all previous UFC games, you didn't really have any idea which button was gonna do what when it came to striking. Everyone on the roster seemed to have different combinations, most of which barely made any sense when it came to trying to memorize them. That's all out the window here in Undisputed. Now, each face button is tied to a limb. The square and triangle buttons control your left and right hands, respectively. X and circle are linked to your feet. When it comes to grappling, it's all sticks. Use L2 and the right stick to shoot a takedown. Once on the ground, specific quarter circle movements advance your position. Clicking in R3 attempts a submission, and this is where we've got to talk about the shine technique. I'm going to do this on camera because it's easier to explain that way. Shining is the act of spinning the right analog stick as fast as possible. It's not timing based, it's not rhythm based, it's just spinning that goddamn thing. The shine system sucks. It sucked back then and it sucks coming back too. I recognize and even respect that Yukes were trying to do something new, something unique, but it's bad on your palms, it's bad on your controllers, it's a mess. Mashing buttons is an option, but shining is the move they were pushing, and it seems to work better than mashing. Now I want to look at career mode, and yes, for the first time in a UFC game we have a career mode that actually feels like a career mode. We create our guy, choose a division, and start working up through the ranks. Emails come in from UFC matchmaker Joe Silva offering us opponents. Who we fight is up to us, and we better be ready to get to work. Watching our win-loss record grow and our spot in the rankings rise or fall adds a weight to every matchup we take. Sometimes, early on, you'll take a chance against a real big-name UFC fighter. Sometimes it works out.
Beautiful! Oh! Joe, he is really trying to reach. Oh my goodness!
Sometimes it doesn't. One of my absolute favorite aspects of career mode is unlocking new sponsors and adding them to your shorts. Nowadays, the UFC doesn't allow fighters to take their own sponsorships. They stomped that financial opportunity for the talent right out. But I'm serious. Getting new gear, changing up my colors, getting new logos to put on my shorts. As my fame and fortune expands, there's something about this that really reflected what the sport was at the time. Another highlight is all of the context that hides in the emails. Sometimes you'll knock somebody out and you'll get an email about an interview they did after the loss. Some of these guys will praise you and your skill. Others will trash you, claiming you got lucky. It's always nice to have these bits of information for the future. Let's say a fighter drops out of an upcoming booking. Dana White will hit you up and ask if you can step in and fill the role. If it's a guy you've beaten and he talked smack, hey, you can leave him high and dry without an opponent. That's how you hold a grudge, Dan Dans. Outside of career, we'll flash over to the classic fights mode. Some of the greatest, most high-profile showdowns in UFC history are here, with the goal being to recreate the fight the way it actually played out. The beautiful Rochelle Leah lays out the story that led to the battle, and let's just be honest, a gorgeous woman talking about anything is a plus, no matter what it is. Rochelle Leah could tell me she just slashed my tires, and I'd say, yes ma'am, thank you ma'am. If you can match the win condition, you'll unlock a video of the actual fight itself. This is the type of flavor these games have always needed. Something to celebrate the sport and its biggest stars. Classic Fights mode is great. Now, like I said at the top, we have 3 games to cover here today on the Undisputed Era, so I'm about to rapid fire through some of my favorite and least favorite aspects of UFC 2009. Are you ready? Can you handle that? Then let's go. A go-to complaint I've had in the past was the size of the roster. This is not a concern here in Undisputed, as there are over 80 fighters spread across the 5 different weight classes. With Pride FC standouts like Rampage Jackson, Vanderlei Silva, and Mirko Cro Cop on the roster, this almost feels like SmackDown shut your mouth in a way. In the early 2000s, when former WCW guys started showing up in the WWF, the video games became way more fun. Look, you had to be there. The blood flying off a guy's head and collecting on the canvas looks awesome, but the damage on a fighter's face is ridiculous. These gashes look like horror movie makeup. We've never had mouthpieces go flying in any MMA game in the past, so it's really cool to see one get ejected here. It does become a bit much though, because the mouthpiece goes flying 100% of the time. You cannot score a knockout in Undisputed without that guard popping out like the pit on a peach. The KO animations are great. It's a good mixture of ragdoll physics and directed reactions. Some of them are a bit comical, like this one here, or this one, but what are you gonna do? There's a funny little detail where occasionally you'll get a zoomed in shot of your knockout blow, and it's clearly not the strike you just landed. The angles are off, the situation is different, it's just a completely fabricated replay. Strange. I love that certain fighters have their own unique animations. Look at BJ Penn's jab. Not a single soul on the rest of the roster can do this jab. Forrest Griffin's punches are exclusive to him as well. Chuck Liddell's signature overhand right looks phenomenal, but it comes at a cost. This is Chuck's right-handed power punch, completely replacing the right hook. Chuck Liddell cannot throw a right hook in this game. That's ridiculous.
What a huge right hand! Joe, he's still a bit rocked here.
He looks like he's on Queer Street to me.
Now, it takes a real hardcore to notice something like this, but maybe that's you. Maybe you've noticed that there are no left-handed fighters in this game. Southpaws like Rich Franklin and Mirko Cro Cop are forced to fight orthodox due to clipping issues in the game's development process. How they couldn't figure that out, I have no idea, but that's where we are. We've gone from having everyone fight Southpaw in the prior games to having none of them here in Undisputed. How do you like that? I've been saying throughout this video how excited I was for UFC 2009 to release. And release it would in May of 2009. You know what else happened in May of 2009? I broke my hand very badly in a fight with my brother. Oh, it was stupid. We got into it. Long story short, when it was over, I was looking at my hand because it hurt, and I noticed that my left ring finger, I had no knuckle. My knuckle was down in my hand. My finger was shorter. It was pretty horrific looking. I figured that I had dislocated my finger. So I grabbed it and I started pulling on it, and I was trying to set it. I was trying to put it back in place, you know? And that didn't work. So I just put my hand in a bowl of ice water. Time went on and I figured, you know what? I probably fractured it. Big deal. I'm such an idiot. I was taking a boxing wrap and just putting it around my hand, and I was going to high school like that. I was going about my days. I was doing everything I normally do. Fast forward, and it was Mother's Day, and I was out with my mom, and she was like, please, for Mother's Day, let me take you to the hospital to get that hand x-rayed, because it was a balloon, as Conor McGregor would say. It was very swollen, and it was bruised. So we go get the x-rays, and the doctor tells me not only is my hand broken, but it was a spiral fracture of the 4th metacarpal, meaning that the bone didn't just break, it broke and it twisted. I don't know if it twisted in the fight or from me trying to set it initially. God damn, that was stupid. So the doctor tells me that just wrapping it and letting it heal on its own is not an option. With the bone being broken and turned inside my hand, they were going to have to go in there, reorient the bone, plate, screws, put it back together. Surgery was indeed a requirement. And oh man, that sucked. Let me tell you how much that sucked. I had a cast on my hand. When the cast came off, I couldn't close my hand. This was about as far as I could get, so I had to go to physical therapy for that for weeks. It was a whole ordeal. Right before my most anticipated video game was about to release. Isn't that something? If you rub your finger over the surgery scar, you can feel the screws. But even with that cast on, I was playing UFC 2009 Undisputed, and no, I'm not kidding about that. Oh, they were different times. It was May 19th, 2009 that Undisputed hit the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. To call it a hit, both critically and commercially, would be accurate. In its first month on the market, the game sold over 1 million copies, a number no prior UFC game had ever even come close to. Inside of 8 months, that number would climb to over 3.5 million copies sold. Even with my broken, surgically repaired hand, I was there day one. I remember hooking up my PS3 in my dad's living room to show it to him, as he was a gigantic MMA fan, and I thought he'd love it. He didn't play video games, but he was super interested in seeing what this new UFC game was all about. I set up a fight for us, ready to take it easy on him so he could just experience it and see what it was about. He chose Czech Congo, I picked Tim Sylvia. As soon as the fight started, he sprinted across the octagon and threw a right hand, knocking me completely out cold in about 4 seconds. I swear to God this is a true story. It's one I'll never forget. My dad never wanted to do another fight after that. He was forever satisfied to have scored the craziest knockout of all time. These are the types of memories that we form with these games. And it doesn't just have to be UFC. It could be Resident Evil, Mortal Kombat, SmackDown, anything. Maybe you've got memories like this. Maybe you've got stories you can share with me down in the comments about games that I don't play. Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Fortnite, anything. A heartfelt memory tied to a game, share it with me. I want to read it. UFC 2009 Undisputed kicked off a brand new era. 1 year later, the sequel was ready to storm the octagon all over again. I think it's worth mentioning here, and I'll make it quick, that the combination of THQ and Yukes were not the first team Dana White and the UFC approached about putting together a new series of games. Everybody knows that in the sports market, electronic arts are the king of the hill. EA Sports is an umbrella that holds several teams underneath, and yes, the UFC met with EA Sports before the THQ deal came together. According to Dana White, EA were totally against the idea of affiliating themselves with a sport as violent and unruly as mixed martial arts. According to numerous other sources over the years, Dana White didn't actually meet with EA Sports at all. He met with EA Los Angeles, whose resume consists of Command and Conquer, Medal of Honor, and more. Why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing it up because shortly after the release of UFC Undisputed 2010, EA Sports would indeed step into the realm of mixed martial arts with EA Sports MMA. We'll talk about that on part 4 of this series. Don't worry. Did you catch what I called this next game, though? UFC Undisputed 2010. The prior game was UFC 2009 Undisputed. Now we've swapped the year and the subtitle for some reason. This is an inconsistency that has always annoyed me, but don't worry. I'm sure the next game will have the title situation all sorted out, right? Look, we covered this new foundation when we looked at the last game. Now we can dive straight into the meat, right into the fun stuff. Let's get to it. First of all, the striking game has expanded. One of my favorite new features here in UFC 2010 is the ability to sway out of the way of incoming punches, then using that momentum to land a devastating counter-strike. I'm gonna make a complaint really early on into the 2010 coverage though. The knockout animations have been completely ruined. They're all the exact same. This animation is a recreation of how Chuck Liddell went down from Rashad Evans' devastating right hand from UFC 88. It's a really crazy KO, but I don't need to see it every goddamn time I knock somebody out. There are others in the game. You can still score a pretty sweet faceplant off an uppercut, but good lord did they take so much fun out of the knockouts with these repeated, canned movements. I do enjoy the fact that particularly violent knockouts can leave the victim down even after the replays, with the doctors and referee trying to bring them to. That's an awesome detail. Let's go back and forth on the good and bad. I like this. As a positive, not every fighter has the exact same stance and movement style anymore. The ground game has also been expanded, but I can't say it was in a good way. Everything feels way more stilted, far more finicky now. It's like you can't even throw several ground strikes in a row without a clunky animation halting the action. The damage system has been modified, with wounds on fighters' faces now looking much more realistic. Man, those 2009 hatchet wounds were insane. The last negative I want to rapid fire for now are the graphics overall. Does UFC 2010 look bad? Absolutely not. I think it holds up pretty well. But they've changed the color palette significantly, with many of the vibrant tones of 2009 being severely toned down. Kimbo Slice is here, and that's awesome, but look at him. I can barely see him. Kimbo is an African American dude, obviously, but look at the game and look at real life, side by side. His skin tone is way off. The same can be said about Anderson Silva. It's a weird issue, but it's something I've always noticed. UFC 2009 was a great foundation, but there wasn't a whole hell of a lot to do. You had exhibition fights, you had online mode, which I haven't really talked about at all, nor do I intend to. It's a sports game online. What do you need to know about it, you know? We also had a really fun career mode. There's only so much that can be done in a sports game, right? No one's gonna buy Madden or FIFA and then complain because they can't drive fast cars and rob banks. But UFC 2010 does what it can to add a little extra flavor. Extra flavor that is appreciated. Tournaments are awesome, and you're darn tootin' we've got a tournament mode here in 2010. Event mode is really cool because we get to name our event, book our own card, and not only do we get to play it out, but Mike Goldberg and Joe Rogan give it the entire treatment.
Hi again, everybody. I'm Mike Goldberg. Welcome once again to the Ultimate Fighting Championship. We have an incredible night of fights in store for you this evening, highlighted by a main event everyone is talking about. With me for the fights tonight again, my partner Joe Rogan. Joe, the fans are pumped up.
Oh yeah, and they should be, Mike. Looking at this fight on paper, it's very tough to call. I mean, they're both extremely well-rounded and in the best shape that we've ever seen them in. This is one of those matchups where anything can happen.
Well, we will soon find out who will prevail in our main event of the evening.
A full hype video with the guys on the main card, a rundown of the action and what to expect. This is fantastic. I didn't put over the commentary in UFC 2009 because I wanted to do it here. I didn't want to be redundant. The commentary is a welcomed addition to the silence we've had up to this point.
Spinning heel kick. Nice leg kick.
Man, you could hear that one. Very solid. Oh, they're just throwing.
Oh, they're exchanging here.
Career mode has also leveled up. Now we're starting out in the World Fighting Alliance, a minor league promotion owned by the UFC, and we've got to establish ourselves before we even see a UFC contract. Over the years, we'll be taking part in the weigh-ins. We've got the option to either respect or disrespect our opponent. Joe Rogan interviews us after a big fight, and we can answer however we want. This career mode is much more involved, and in most ways, it's much more fun as a result. We've covered some fun, unlockable characters already on this series, from Mask and the Tapout crew over to Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta. It's already been goofy, but none of them can hold a candle to Shaquille O'Neal. Yeah, that's right, Shaq Diesel in the octagon. He's gigantic, he's fast as hell, and he'll put your lights out. While they're not unlockable, I'd like to shine a light on Dan Severn, Jens Pulver, and Royce Gracie. These three legends were exclusive to the PS3 iteration of the game, for some reason. UFC Undisputed 2010 released on May 25th, 2010, and pretty much across the board reviewed better than the previous installment. Fans around the world were obviously still clamoring for more MMA video games, and with former WWE champion Brock Lesnar on the big golden cover, Undisputed 2010 would once again sell over 3 million units at retail. There's even a PSP version of the game, and if you've never played it, it's actually damn good. Even with just one set of shoulder buttons and only one analog stick, the gameplay translates well. 2 games into the THQ deal and the UFC had yet to miss. Undisputed, up to this point, was undefeated. Finally, MMA fans were eating good. In early 2012, a third and final entry in the series would grace home consoles. UFC Undisputed 3 would break the annual release schedule, skipping 2011 entirely, dropping in February of 2012. And yes, I said UFC Undisputed 3. Another title change. 3 games, 3 different title layouts. This drives me nuts. But luckily, that's probably the worst part of the entire game. I'm wasting 0 time and jumping straight into everyone's favorite aspect of Undisputed 3, Pride Mode. Those of you who are longtime MMA fans know about Pride Fighting Championships. Founded in 1997, Pride quickly became the WCW to the UFC's WWF. With talent like Mirko Cro Cop, Fedor Emelianenko, Kazushi Sakuraba, Vanderlei Silva, and more, Pride was a beautiful, bright star for as long as it lasted. 10 years after opening its doors, Pride FC would be acquired by the UFC, who would shut the promotion down and absorb many of its fighters. Hey, I told you this was a WCW-WWF situation. Pride's inclusion here in Undisputed 3 was a huge surprise, as the company had been gone for 5 years by this point, without as much as a peep from the UFC about doing anything with it. But enough talk about the mode, let's look at it. I'm just gonna say it. This is the best that UFC Undisputed 3 can look. The bright white ring, the beautiful Saitama Super Arena in Japan, the blue gloves, and the retro attires for the fighters who used to compete in Pride. It's tremendous. You can't top this. And it's not just a visual thing, the rules are different. Stomps to the face of a downed opponent are legal, as are soccer kicks to the head and knees to the head of a downed opponent. Even the rounds are accurate, with a 10-minute opening frame and a 5-minute follow-up. UFC Hall of Famer Bas Rutten joins his longtime commentary partner Steven Quadros on the call, which is amazing.
Oh, big left. What a devastating punch. He dropped him. Oh, great punch. And this, wow, what a kick. Uh-oh. And that roundhouse kick lands.
Yeah, it was almost like somebody hand clapped right. Lights out.
Mirko Cro Cop has made a statement here tonight.
And while we're talking Pride, a promotion famous for their over-the-top presentation, let's hit on the entrances, complete with gigantic video screens, a stage, and a ramp. It's so nice to have entrances in a modern UFC game, because they've been gone up to this point for some reason. And sure, you're not gonna watch these every time, you'll start to skip them once you've seen them, but I'm all for a heightened level of presentation. These entrances are not Pride exclusive either. Our favorite UFC fighters also get to walk their way to the octagon. The striking has once again been updated, and damn it, this feels fantastic. I don't know if you could tell by the way I talked about it, but I was never really in love with Undisputed 2010. It was a slight step forward, but I felt like many of the new strikes and movements were too fast and they look janky. Undisputed 3 has added even more to your arsenal, but it all feels so much better. The quick strikes like jabs and straights finally feel like they matter and are perfect for stopping a charging opponent in their tracks. I like to use jabs from way outside to set up a power strike to anyone who dares to get close. Submissions have been completely rehauled. Now to lock up a hold, we're tasked with overlapping the opponent's color with our color. Stay on top long enough and there you go, that's the tap. This system is pretty similar to the sweet spot mechanic EA Sports MMA introduced the year prior, but slow down. We'll talk about the UFC's video game competitors next time. Leg kick TKOs are finally introduced here in Undisputed 3, and seriously, these are some of my favorite finishes in the game. Taking the time and enacting the strategy of targeting your opponent's legs isn't easy, but once you've beaten that leg to a pulp and they can't even stand anymore, good God is that rewarding. If you haven't noticed by now, we're not repeating the same KO animations on every single finish anymore. There's far more variety this time out. There's also far fewer clean KOs. Not every UFC fight ends with a one-hitter quitter, you know? Many of them end with the referee pulling the winner away, calling the fight off when the other guy is no longer intelligently defending himself. Undisputed 3 will have you earning more TKO victories than ever before, and they look so good. Your opponent will cover up, they'll try and sway away from the downpour of blows, but eventually it's too much, and they'll go out like a light. The final mechanic I want to shine a light on is finish the fight, which means even after knocking an opponent out cold, we can continue to smash their brains in until the referee physically removes us from their corpse. Jesus Christ. Undisputed 3 once again represents a specific era for the Ultimate Fighting Championship. This was the first game to feature the newer, lower weight classes of featherweight and bantamweight, full of talent from the WEC, another promotion the UFC acquired around this same time. This is also the last game to release without female fighters on the roster, but again, that's another conversation for another time. Some may look at these 3 titles as the Undisputed trilogy, but for me, it's the Undisputed Era. UFC Undisputed 3 is easily the best entry in the trilogy, and to this day is considered by many to be the greatest UFC game ever made. So what about UFC Undisputed 4? Each installment has gotten better, so a 4th entry would raise the bar again, right? Well, there is no Undisputed 4. The series publisher, THQ, would file for bankruptcy just 10 months after the release of Undisputed 3. The company's assets and IP would be sold away to the highest bidders. WWE would wind up with Take-Two Interactive, South Park would go to Ubisoft, and the UFC rights would be purchased by EA Sports, the very same company Dana White publicly buried just 3 years prior. We'll talk about these games in Part 5. I don't have exact numbers. As far as I can tell, they're not available, but Undisputed 3 sold well over 2 million copies. If your memory is sharp, you might recall that both prior games sold better than this one, surprisingly. At the end of the day, it is what it is. I wish I had my own save file to work with here so I could show you guys my old highlight reels from my PlayStation 3, but that's not possible right now. I bought a PlayStation 3 copy on eBay specifically for this video, and it doesn't fucking work. Luckily, the co-host of Monday Night Blitz, the one and only handy dandy Andy Jarek, stepped in and let me borrow his entire Xbox 360 and his copy of Undisputed 3 to capture this footage. I've got fantastic memories tied to Undisputed 3, and my save file is still there on my PS3. I just need a copy of the game that'll allow me to access it. There's a metaphor in there, if you look for it. There are memories we have, memories we look back on very fondly, experiences we cherish. Sometimes they're tied to a movie, maybe a game, it can be a place, it can be anything. Sometimes, upon revisiting the subject the memories are tied to, we found out it's not what we thought it was. Whether it's not as special as we remembered, or maybe it just hasn't aged well. There are occasions where it doesn't work out, and you wish you'd simply left the memories alone. But other times, we revisit the subject, and we step right back into those moments we loved. It's just as good as it ever was, maybe even better, now that we're older and we can really appreciate things in a different light. That is how I feel about Undisputed 3. This holds up better than I thought it would. 2009 is a time capsule. 2010 still isn't anything super special, but Undisputed 3? Man, this really might be the greatest of all time. I hope you've all enjoyed this look back at the Undisputed Era. Oh, there it is. Thank you for joining me here today for the History of UFC Video Games Part 3, the Undisputed Era. Stop by next time for the History of UFC Video Games Part 4, Uncaged Competition, where we are not looking at UFC games, but their competitors. And one last time, if you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting me over on patreon.com/616entertainment. For as low as $2 a month, you can sign up and bring us one step closer to the next in-depth retrospective. Again, I do all of this myself. I write these, shoot these, record these, edit these, upload these. It's all me. I'm a one-man crew. I love you very much. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I almost forgot to do my trademark sign-off. Until next time, I love ya, and I'll see you soon. We closed out the History of UFC Video Games Part 3 looking at the final installment of the Undisputed franchise. Amongst Undisputed 3's many highlights, none shined brighter than Pride Mode, where we were allowed to step out of the octagon and into the ring. Grand Prix tournaments with stomps to the face, soccer kicks. Oh, it's all perfectly legal. But this wasn't the first video game appearance of Japan's biggest and best mixed martial arts promotion. To experience that, we'd have to turn back the clock nearly 10 years from Undisputed 3's release. And today, we'll do that. But that's not all. Pride FC on the PlayStation 2 wasn't the only MMA video game released without the Ultimate Fighting Championships branding. In 2010, EA Sports would get into the fight with their own game, EA Sports MMA. 2011 would see the debut of Supremacy MMA, a much darker, grittier title from Kung Fu Factory. The scene was hot, even outside of the UFC. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into here today. Welcome to the History of UFC Video Games Part 4, Uncaged Competition. Oh, what's up, Dan-Dans? My name is Ian, and I want to thank you for joining me here today. Now, is it strange to cover 0 UFC-branded video games in a series called The History of UFC Video Games? Yeah, probably. But I want to step away from the big license for a minute. I want to walk outside of the mainstream and focus on some of the true greats of the genre. And some of the biggest pieces of trash you've ever seen in your life. So if you're on board with that, stick around. If not, you can go find something else to do. I don't care. Let's get down to business. Up first when it comes to Uncaged Competition, I want to take a look at 2003's Pride FC on the PlayStation 2. We talked about Pride last time, the WCW to the UFC's WWF, the biggest martial arts promotion to ever come out of Japan. Famous for talent of the highest level and the lowest level. Infamous for absolute freak show fights that would never be sanctioned anywhere else in the world. God bless him, you know? Pride Fighting Championships, exclusive to the PlayStation 2, was developed by Anchor Inc. Whoa. Anchor Inc. again? The same team that made the first UFC game on the Dreamcast? Yes, sir. The mediocre UFC sequels on the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, released between 2002 and 2004, those were all developed by Opus and Dream Factory. Anchor Inc. took that foundation they created on the Dreamcast and signed a deal with Pride. Who would publish this Pride game? How about THQ? Yeah, way before THQ put pen to paper with the UFC to publish the Undisputed series, they were working with Pride. Small world, right? After looking at the 4 UFC sequels, Sudden Impact and Tapout 2 and all that, I know what you're thinking. This isn't going to be good. You've been there and done it at this point, right? Well, you're wrong. And oh, how happy I am to tell you you're wrong about this. Pride FC on the PlayStation 2 is awesome, Dan-Dans. This is indeed that Dreamcast gameplay from the first UFC game, but it's polished, it's tight, the controls are responsive, the fighter movements, the striking combinations, the grappling controls, AI behavior, it's all so much better than it has ever been. UFC Sudden Impact feels like pure shit when compared to Pride FC. I'm gonna sit out for a second. Just take a look at this fight between Gary Goodridge and Tom Erickson. The fighters here in Pride FC actually behave the way they're supposed to. If you're fighting Vanderlei Silva, he's going to want to stand and strike. He's going to throw murderous combinations. He's going to try and take your head off. Get in there with Ken Shamrock and you better keep your ankles protected. A wild man like Ensign Inoue, look, if your reflexes aren't sharp, he's gonna catch you with something crazy. The AI actually representing a fighter's personality and style all the way back on the PlayStation 2, this is impressive. The knockouts are impactful because the strikes are sharp and heavy. Submissions can be button mashing, back and forth wars, or you might snatch it up in the blink of an eye. Careful with the button mashing though. I literally developed a blister on my middle finger after playing for like 25 minutes. That's no joke. You guys know me. You know I've kept my old memory cards from my childhood, my teenage years, and yes, I still have my save file from Pride FC. I was 16 going on 17 the last time I played this game, and oh holy hell, I played this game to death. This was my first MMA game where I actually kept track of my win-loss record. I would form storylines in my head for who I fought and why I fought them. If somebody beat me, I'd be like, man, I gotta get a couple wins under my belt so I can get a rematch with that guy. I would go to my family computer and create these tables that looked as close as humanly possible to SureDog's website. I wish I still had that PC so I could show you these old tables and we could go through my win-loss record, but this was a long time ago. This was 2006 and 2007. That PC worked very hard for me, tip of the cap to an old legend. I don't even know what happened to that computer, to be honest with you. And do you ever do that, by the way? Do you ever look back fondly on an inanimate object like it was an old friend of yours? Or is it just me? Should I go to the hospital? So no, I don't have that PC, but I do have my original save file with my original created fighter. Wow, this is a blast from the past, Dan-Dans. I've been away from the Pride ring for 16 years. The question on everybody's mind is, do I still got it? Yeah, I still got it. And yes, that's a straight Frankensteiner. No, this is not possible in mixed martial arts. A Frankensteiner is a professional wrestling maneuver that requires a ton of coordination and cooperation from your opponent to pull off, but Pride was silly, so what the hell? There were also several worked fights in Pride. Did you know that? Pro wrestler Nobuhiko Takada's fight against Mark the Hammer Coleman from Pride 5 back in 1998 is 100% a work. To be totally clear, Pride itself was not fake. Very, very few fights were rigged, dirty, worked, fake, gimmicked, predetermined, etc. But there were a few. If you're asking how I know, number one, just watch the fight. Watch Coleman allow himself to get kicked and sell the kicks. Watch Coleman hilariously bend down to present his forehead for soft strikes from Takada, and then watch Coleman theatrically reach out for help before tapping to Takada's heel hook, which isn't applied properly and isn't putting any torque on the joint at all. Or just listen to Coleman himself or his training partners come out and admit it years later. Either way. So yeah, a Frankensteiner is nothing. On the topic of created fighters, though, I'm not the only custom fighter on the roster. I totally forgot about this, but I also made my own versions of Randy Couture, Mirko Krokop, and more. And honestly, I think I did a pretty damn good job on these. One of the many things that made Pride so special, one of the many things that set it apart from the UFC, was its style of presentation. Pride entrances were unbelievable. Their Grand Prix tournaments were grueling tests of will, and both of these key ingredients of the Pride formula are here in the game. When playing a Grand Prix tournament, each fighter has their own hype video that plays before their entrance. These entrances are full length, they're meticulously animated, and they're fantastic. The Texas Crazy Horse Heath Herring comes out with his trench coat and cowboy hat like he's the Undertaker. Gilbert Ivel's suspenders and sunglasses make his dancing look like $1 million. It's all here. I haven't mentioned it yet, but how about these graphics, right? This is a PS2 game from 2003, and it looks damn good, even today. This is a lame thing to say, but it's true. The game looks even better on my TV than it does through this recording, I assure you. And that's a frustrating thing to try and convey because there's no way for you to actually see it, you know? There is a way for you to hear the Pride Ladies ring introductions, though.
In the red corner, from the USA, Ken Shamrock! And the winner is, by a knockout, Champion!
Winning a Grand Prix tournament sees the champion celebrate in the ring in front of the sold-out Saitama Super Arena in Japan. The confetti cascades from the sky as the coaches and trainers and even our opponent congratulate us on the victory. The massive trophy and championship belt are awarded. We pose for the photographers at ringside. Honestly, I appreciate how cool this is so much more now than I did as a teenager. This is perfect. This feels huge. It feels like an event. Pride FC hit the PlayStation 2 in February of 2003, meaning this dropped between UFC Throwdown and UFC Tapout. I don't think I have to say this, but I will. Pride FC is so much better than either of them. For my money, up until the release of UFC 2009 Undisputed, this was the best MMA video game ever made. Pride FC reviewed very well, earning great scores from nearly every major outlet. According to my research, the game even sold around 300,000 copies, meaning this non-UFC branded video game outsold every UFC game outside of Throwdown. Moving away from the UFC branding doesn't mean we're only going to look at games that sold 12 copies at half price. Pride FC moved units. It reviewed better than any of the UFC sequels, and honestly, it holds up far better than any of them too. Pride Fighting Championships may have been purchased and closed down by the UFC in 2007, but there's a phrase that is still repeated amongst old school Pride fans to this day. Pride never die. Through my save file, through this video, and through the hearts of Pride fans around the world, it still rings true. I think we'll all be saying it forever. Pride never die. There is another Pride video game on the PlayStation 2 called Pride Grand Prix 2003, and I actually do own a copy of it, but it was never released here in North America. How was I able to play it? Well, when I was a teenager, I installed a flip top with Swap Magic on my PlayStation 2 Slim, and I did so that I could play Pride Grand Prix 2003 and Fire Pro Wrestling Returns, which is a legendary wrestling video game, if you didn't know. I did all of that work, and I printed out like a 350-page guide so that I could translate Fire Pro Returns. And then less than a year later, they localized Fire Pro for North America. Dan's the second chapter here on the history of UFC video games, Part 4, Uncaged Competition, is going to look at EA Sports MMA, a game that I have a tremendous affinity for, a game that I have already covered more in depth than anyone ever has here on YouTube. Rather than rewriting, re-editing, and recreating a video that I've already done in the past, I'm actually going to take that video and drop it right here. Now, if you've already seen the life and death of EA Sports MMA, the video that I released January 7th, 2022, feel free to skip ahead to Chapter 3. Or, if you've never seen it, you are in for a ride. In 2010, mixed martial arts was booming. All-time greats Anderson Silva and George St. Pierre were in their absolute prime, turning away all challengers to their thrones more often than not in spectacular fashion. Former WWE superstar Brock Lesnar won the UFC Heavyweight Championship, and with his arrival came an injection of attitude the likes of which the very real world of mixed martial arts had never seen. But MMA wasn't monopolized by the Ultimate Fighting Championship. No, sir. The California-based Strikeforce were running events on Showtime and even CBS, showcasing the likes of Fedor Emelianenko and Brett Rogers to an audience of over 5.4 million viewers. Dream, a Japanese promotion born from the ashes of Pride FC, were drawing a crowd of nearly 50,000 to the Saitama Super Arena. The business of mixed martial arts was exploding on television, on pay-per-view, and for the first time in forever, in the digital realm of video games. The worldwide industry leader, the UFC, had made its home console debut on the Sega Dreamcast in late 2000. UFC 2009 wasn't perfect by any means, don't get me wrong, but it represented evolution. MMA fans finally had a video game that actually resembled their favorite sport, rather than a rock'em sock'em punch-a-mania that felt more like Ready to Rumble boxing than it did Fight Night. And speaking of Fight Night, when would EA Sports step into the cage? As I stated at the top, in 2010, MMA was growing exponentially, and being the biggest sports dev team out there, you'd have to imagine that EA had their eyes on such a hot commodity, right? And while the UFC were exclusively aligned with THQ and Yukes, their aforementioned competitors, both Strikeforce and Dream, were wide open. EA Sports MMA was announced in 2009, and on the spot, UFC President Dana White declared war, going as far as to state that any UFC fighter who signed their likeness over to EA Sports would be blacklisted by the promotion for life. Which was funny, seeing as though UFC Hall of Famer Randy Couture, who would headline the upcoming UFC pay-per-view event, would be featured on EA MMA's cover art. This is already juicy, but trust me, this is only the beginning. We've got a ton to cover here today. This is the life and death of EA Sports MMA. There's no better place to start than the very beginning, right? So who the hell made this game? You're thinking, it's EA Sports MMA, you moron. EA Sports made it. Listen, pal, EA Sports is the big umbrella. There are several huge development teams underneath that umbrella. It's not the same people making Madden, NHL, FIFA, UFC, and F1 every year. How the hell do you think they'd cram all that into 365 days? EA Tiburon, one of the teams underneath the EA Sports umbrella, are the ones responsible for EA MMA. They're also the Madden team to this very day. Hell, it was EA Tiburon who gave us NFL Street 1, 2, and 3. And Superman Returns, the final Superman video game ever developed, all the way back in 2006. How's that for a little trivia? What the hell was I talking about? Oh yeah, EA Sports MMA. Electronic Arts are elite in the video game industry. It goes without saying, right? EA are big enough that they have the exclusive rights to all simulation-based NFL video games. Madden is the king of the castle, whether you like it or not. EA had Tiger Woods, Rory McIlroy, they even have the top-of-the-line hockey franchise out there. Take-Two Interactive shut down their NHL 2K series back in 2010. Even 2K Sports were like, you know what? Never mind. Just take hockey. We're done. EA's dominance in the sports scene begs the question. How is it that back in 2007, the UFC wound up signing with THQ? We know nowadays EA UFC is the premier MMA video game on the market, so why didn't this relationship blossom at the start of MMA's boom period? It's a funny story, actually. According to UFC president Dana White, he approached EA Sports when he first began his video game crusade. That 5-year MMA video game drought, Dana wasn't taking it laying down. He knew his company was big money, and he wanted a major partner to help put together a video game that would do justice to the biggest MMA promotion in the world. EA Sports shut him down, and they shut him down hard. At the UFC 100 press conference in July of 2009, shortly after the announcement of EA Sports MMA, White told the media, "I've been in the trenches for almost 10 years, and I've been dealing with all these businesses, and EA was one of them. EA Sports told us, you're not a real sport. We wouldn't touch this thing. We want nothing to do with this. We put our asses on the line, THQ and the UFC, to make a video game deal in the worst economy in the world. We go out there and do this thing, and it's successful, and now fucking EA Sports wants to do a video game. Really? That's not what you told us a year and a half ago." The tirade continued, but I think you get the point. UFC 2009 Undisputed was a hit. He's right about that. Across the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, the game sold over 2 million units and reviewed well. The decision had been made, the contract had been signed, and now the fight was on. But the question on everyone's mind wasn't whether or not EA actually spit in Dana White's face. The question was, could EA Sports hold their own in the cage? The first trailer for EA Sports MMA was shown in November of 2009. Not on an E3 stage, not on a video game showcase event, no. It aired on CBS as a part of the Strikeforce Fedor vs. Rogers event. The trailer pitted the two heavyweight competitors against each other in the digital realm right before their main event showdown. The in-game models were impressive, the animations were smooth, and my personal hype level skyrocketed. I wanted to play as the legendary Fedor Emelianenko, who, if you're not an MMA fan, damn. Fedor was like the MMA Mike Tyson when he was in his prime. And I don't mean he was an incredibly skilled boxer, I mean he was just a war monster. Knockout power? Check. Extremely high-level grappling skills? Check. An untouchable, practically scary aura surrounding him? Check. Fedor was called the last emperor for a reason, man. And that's when my wheels really started to turn. Sure, playing as Fedor would be cool, but could I beat Fedor? God, I remember thinking, I need this game right here, right now. Let's skip the slow trickle of information leading up to release and jump straight into the big stuff. EA MMA's roster filled out in a big way. International stars like Fabricio Verdum, Shinya Aoki, Jacare Souza, Gegard Mousasi, and more lended major hardcore credibility. Former UFC stars like Renato Babalu Sobral, Dan Henderson, Andrei Arlovsky, and Nick Diaz caught the eyes of the modern fans. Legendary fighters like Boss Rutan, Ken Shamrock, and Rickson Gracie held down the nostalgia front, and right on the cover, holy hell, Fedor Emelianenko and Randy the Natural Couture, who was actively signed to the UFC. How the hell was Randy able to appear in EA MMA? Well, he never signed his likeness rights over to the UFC, which prohibited him from appearing in their video games, but he didn't like the UFC's specifics when it came to likeness rights. But when EA Sports knocked on Randy's door and waved that Madden money around, well, now you've got a UFC Hall of Famer as your EA Sports MMA cover star. And again, if you're not an MMA fan, Fedor and Couture squaring off on the cover art here was huge. In 2008, when Randy was the UFC heavyweight champion, he campaigned for the UFC to sign Fedor, with the goal being a mega main event showdown. For several reasons, it never happened. So Randy did what anyone would do. This fight meant so much to him and his legacy that he retired from the UFC in an attempt to break his contract so that he could go sign with a promotion who would reach an agreement with Fedor. Couture versus Fedor had to happen, but that's not really how contracts work, so this caused a massive lawsuit between Couture and the UFC, and the super fight never happened. EA Sports MMA positioned itself as the only way to live out the dream showdown, which, in my mind, is brilliant. I mean, it worked on me. So, we've gotten this far, we've set the scene. What does EA MMA's gameplay look like? What does it feel like? I figure instead of trying to describe it to you, why don't I just show it to you?
Is nowhere near. Wow, that punch has gotta hurt. Oh man, what a shot! And the champion is stunned. Souza takes him down to the canvas with a double leg takedown. That's Wrestling 101. Waller has real.
How on earth is he still standing? That was a massive blow.
Down he goes. Zaronskis cracks him on the head with a sucker kick. There it is. The ref has stopped the fight. What a beatdown. What a TKO.
Yeah, it's good. Look, one of my favorite aspects of EA MMA was the inclusion of very real danger. Very real one-shot knockout power. If you overextend yourself and get caught with a power shot on the chin, you're done, pal. That's it. You don't get to scramble and try to get it together. No, you're out cold just like that. I loved this. And don't get it twisted, it's not always one and done. It's actually pretty rare, and scrambling to regain your bearings after getting caught and rocked is much more common. But just take a look at these animations, man. Listen to the impact of some of this ground and pound.
Denied on the overhand. Beautifully done. Oh, wow, he's already working him, and the fight's just started. Oh, I can't believe it. The fight is already over. It ends in spectacular fashion via TKO, and here we thought we were just getting started.
In this respect, EA Sports MMA put UFC Undisputed to shame. Seriously. On the submission front, EA went out of their way to avoid the much maligned submission control system of their competitor. UFC Undisputed introduced the shine mechanic, where, in order to apply submissions, a player was forced to rotate the right stick as fast as humanly possible for upwards of 30 seconds to a minute. Players complained of broken controllers and even blisters on their palms due to this control scheme. EA Sports opted instead for a simplified system. One button. You press one button to initiate a submission, and if your opponent doesn't block it in time, the fight is on. In this second stage, you once again need just one button to battle back and forth. It's one part rhythm-based and one part cat and mouse. You want to string together as many presses as possible without interruption from your opponent, while also managing your stamina meter. It's simple, it's effective, and the X-ray feature here is awesome. Chokes are handled differently. In a choke submission, you want to use the right stick to find and chase the sweet spot, which is hidden from you until you find it. If this sounds familiar to you, even though you've never played EA MMA, it's because in 2012, UFC Undisputed 3 would straight up steal this mechanic. I did kind of launch into knockouts and submissions without talking about the striking controls, didn't I? Alright, let's circle back. If there's anything that turned off many players who gave EA Sports MMA a shot, it was the striking controls. UFC Undisputed mapped your limbs to the face buttons, much like your favorite fighters of the past. EA MMA mapped your punches and kicks to the right analog stick. Flicking diagonally up throws a simple jab. Flicking diagonally forward throws a cross. A counterclockwise quarter circle from 3 o'clock to 12 o'clock threw a right hook, whereas a clockwise circle from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock throws a left hook. Holding down the R1 button aims whatever strike you're throwing at the body, and holding L2 switches your attack from a punch to a kick. If this sounds extremely complicated, it's because it is. It is when you hear it explained, at least. I would argue that when you have the controller in your hand, it's not as hard to figure out as it sounds, but my argument doesn't matter in the long run, and here's why. This striking system straight up killed EA MMA for many players. It was too hard, and they were out. Game sucks! I disagree strongly, but it is what it is. The real head scratcher is this. EA allows you to go into the options menu and simply switch over to a face button control scheme for striking. This tells me that they internally weren't entirely sold on their own control scheme. If you really believe in your controls, believe in them. Don't allow a secondary simplified option for people who don't want to take the time to learn the proper mechanics. If your control scheme is too complicated for the average player and you know it, throw it out entirely. The ability to switch your striking controls over to the face buttons was a major problem, and here's why. It completely broke the online scene. If your strikes were tied to the face buttons, you could throw punches so much faster than people like me who use the default stick-based system. There was an epidemic in the EA MMA online community centered around body spammers. Body spammers were players who would switch their striking controls over to the face buttons, and right at the start of the fight they would blitz forward, throwing hook after hook after hook at their opponent's midsection, which would completely deplete their stamina and health bars in the blink of an eye. And if you use the default stick-based striking system, you were practically defenseless to this. This sucked. And if you're watching this and you were a body spammer back in the day, you still suck. You completely ruined the fun of fighting online, and you drove people away from a community that was already small to begin with. Fuck you. I dipped into a negative aspect of the game there for a second, so let's turn it around and put over one of EA MMA's greatest strengths, its presentation. Fighters walk down the ramp on their way to the cage or ring. More on that in a second. Mauro Ranallo and Frank Shamrock provide excellent commentary for your fights.
For many years, it was the fight everyone wanted to see. Well, now it is happening right here, right now. The matchup between two MMA legends, Randy the Natural Couture and the Last Emperor, Fedor Emelianenko. He has his back, and really, he has so many options from here. Of course, option number one is usually that rear naked choke. Uh-oh, he's given up his back, and this could be the beginning of the end.
It's a bad position, Mauro. He's got to get hand control immediately, and he's got to turn and face his opponent.
Jimmy Lennon Jr. gives us the pre- and post-fight announcements. We've got real-world brands like Rockstar Energy and even Showtime on the mat. And you know me. As a belt mark, you bet your ass I appreciate the appearance of several different championship belts. Now, why are there several different championship belts? Well, that's simple. It's because there are several different promotions you can fight for. Look, this isn't called Strikeforce 2010 or whatever the hell else they could have called it. This isn't a one-promotion deal. Strikeforce, the number 2 MMA promotion in the world, is indeed present, and that's fantastic, but we've also got a generic version of Dream, Japan's biggest promotion at the time. My favorite part of this is that Dream's fights didn't take place in a cage, but in a ring. Let me tell you how much variety this adds, Dan Dans. My goodness. Bouncing between a cage and a ring is great. But how about the different rule sets? See, Strikeforce doesn't allow elbows on the ground. The unified rules do allow elbows on the ground. So if you want to mount your opponent and rain down elbows, you gotta take your fight to someone else's cage. Maybe an independent promotion, right? And hey, maybe they don't fight in the Strikeforce style hexagon cage. Maybe this indie league uses a circular cage. Japanese MMA rules don't allow grounded elbows, but they do allow soccer kicks to the head and stomps to the face. This level of creativity and variety for every fight you play spices things up in a way I can't even put into words. By the way, not a single UFC video game to this day has allowed for this level of creativity. Not one. And I've got more to gush over. EA Sports put so much love into their presentation that they made sure every fighter has their own stance. In real life, Chuck Liddell and Shogun Rua don't hold the exact same stance and style. Well, in the UFC game, they do. With EA MMA, the developers stated that the players would be able to identify which stance belonged to which fighter, even if it were applied to a generic model. For hardcore combat sports fans like me, this was a dream come true. The fights themselves feel different from the competition as well. UFC Undisputed's clock runs in double time, like you're playing NFL Blitz or something. EA MMA's clock is real time, brother. If you're in a championship fight and you're more of a point fighter, you don't have that knockout power or slick submission game, you better be ready to battle for 25 minutes into a decision, because this is a very real 25 minutes. That may be a little too real for some, but not me. Sign me up for the big time.
Emelianenko with a soccer kick to the head.
A career mode is important for any combat sports game, and in my opinion, there is only one combat sports game ever made with an absolutely perfect career mode. It's called Fight Night Round 4. Your manager approaches you with a list of opponents. One guy might have a losing record. He's not even ranked. The next guy is climbing up the ranks just like you are. He's working on his record and it's a good challenge. Another dude might be like 22-3. He's coming off a loss in a title fight. He's way out of your league. But man, if you could just land that one good shot, all of a sudden, you're a contender. It could be worth the risk. There might not be a single guy you're approached with that you're willing to sign up against. And you don't have to. Just wait for a new batch of opponents. You might fall in the ranks and your popularity will suffer, but you can get that back, right? So, does EA MMA stand up to Fight Night Round 4's arguably perfect career mode? In one word, no. Look, here's the deal. We've got Bas Rutten as our coach. He's fully, and very nicely I might add, voice acted, and he guides us through the cutthroat world of mixed martial arts. He uses his connections to earn us opportunities to train in Thai boxing gyms across the world, or maybe Randy Couture's gym to work on our wrestling. The options here are extremely impressive, and I'd say the same about our career progression. We start off in a podunk little indie promotion, and after stringing a few impressive wins together, a mid-tier league will reach out and offer a contract. At this point, we can head to Brazil and fight in a ring under Vale Tudo rules, or sign with a UK-based operation which adheres to the unified rule set. Making a name for yourself here opens up the big time, and contracts from the Dream clone Mystic as well as Strikeforce will slide across our desk. Have I used the word variety enough in this retrospective? Goodness gracious. At this point, you're probably wondering where this goes wrong. I stated right at the top that this career mode doesn't stand up to Fight Night Round 4, and here's why. It's the same place where all of the other career modes fall apart. The matchmaking. A duo of completely nonsensical booking and unrealistic rematches drag down an otherwise great gameplay mode. There is absolutely zero reason why I should be rematching a guy with a losing record in just my 4th pro fight. I fought him. I finished him decisively. And the very next fight I'm offered is him again. Why do I have to create storylines in my head to make up for this terrible booking? Oh yeah, he argued that the refs stopped the fight too soon, so they booked a rematch. Yeah, it's personal this time. Why do I have to do that? This, coupled with taking on the same guys sometimes 5 to 6 times across your career, completely pull you out of the otherwise very positive experience. If you know me, you know I am notoriously a single-player guy. I so rarely jump into a game's online modes. But I'm also a big-time trophy hunter. I made the trophy list for Retromania Wrestling. Let me tell you, I knocked it out of the park. EA MMA's trophy list required a player to level all the way up online. And when I tell you that this took ages, man, it's hard to put into words what a long and arduous journey this was. But let me set the scene. I'll do my best. First of all, I wasn't alone in this endeavor. I mention him all the time, but my good buddy Bathroom Money Tim Ewers was also in pursuit of this elusive platinum trophy. It was a different time. It was 2010. It was before full-time jobs, before mortgages, before kids. It was 2 guys hanging out, staying up all hours of the night, both on our own separate PS3s hooked up to our own separate TVs, drinking fatal amounts of sugary sodas, and in Tim's case, chain-smoking cigarettes between fights. I swear to God, he'd keep a cigarette in his mouth for an entire round because he didn't have time to set it into the ashtray. It was an incredible sight to see. We'd spend all night fighting anybody we were matched up against online. Sometimes you'd have a bottom-of-the-barrel body spammer to deal with. Other times you'd have a back-and-forth battle with somebody at your same skill level. And every here and there, you get matched up with somebody like Serdov, who finished as one of the best EA MMA players in the world. A guy who is still on my friends list to this day because we used to get together to have practice fights. And no, I never beat him. Imagine this going on forever. Or, I mean, it felt like forever. White belt, green belt, on and on and on. And after you earned your red belt and you thought you were done, no sir, you just earned the ability to compete in the Masters division. Rinse and repeat those nights of Mountain Dew Code Red, cigarettes, and no sleep for months and months on end. It sounds silly now. This comment section could easily fill up with, "You guys sound like losers." But let me tell you something, man. I think I can count on my hands how many times I've had that much fun. And the story doesn't end there. This isn't just a, "Hey, what a good time" tale. No. Tim and I were active on the EA MMA message boards, which were frequently visited by the actual developers of the game. We'd get on there and bust balls saying, "Do you have any idea how long it takes to level up in this game? We want double XP, damn it." And guess what? We'd get a response back. "You got it. Double XP starts tonight and runs through the weekend." We were blown away. This was 2010. Who the hell had this kind of access to the developers of the games they were playing back then? This was unheard of, at least to us. So what did we do? We went out, we bought a bunch of garbage to eat, and we marathoned our way through a weekend of double XP. It was tremendous. There is a bittersweet ending to this story, but I'll get to that in just a little bit. Let's put a pin in the Platinum Trophy chase for a second so I can tell you about the unbelievably forgotten EA Sports live broadcast feature. In short, this was a live event taking place exclusively inside of EA MMA, hosted by the developers of the game. Real players from around the world were selected to compete in front of the entire community, and before the bell rang, they would literally get on camera and cut a promo. This was out of control. It feels like a fever dream looking back on it now. I never had the chance to compete, but man, watching someone talk smack like they were The Rock, only to get completely dominated and knocked out cold inside of 60 seconds, it was a one-of-a-kind thing, Dan-Dans. If all this sounds great so far and you're thinking, man, I can't believe I missed out on this whole thing. I want to check this game out. I need to see for myself what makes EA MMA so special. Why wasn't anybody talking about this game? Why did none of my friends say, "Hey dude, you need to check out EA MMA"? There's a quick and easy answer to that question, unfortunately. Nobody bought EA Sports MMA. The game reviewed very well, pulling higher scores than UFC Undisputed 2010 on some outlet scales. The game was showcased on CBS, on pay-per-view. It had the EA Sports marketing juggernaut behind it. But it didn't matter. Remember at the very top of this video when I mentioned that UFC 2009 sold over 2 million copies and set the world on fire? Hell, that game was the catalyst for EA MMA even existing in the first place. So you know it was a big deal. Get ready for this. EA Sports MMA, in its first month on the market, sold 45,000 units. 45,000. Doug Kreutz of Cohen & Company labeled EA MMA as dead on arrival, which are 3 words you never want to hear in regards to a brand new IP. I was shocked to see how poorly EA MMA was selling, but I should have seen the writing on the wall. On those nights that Tim and I were grinding out the levels online, we were running into the same players over and over and over again. We knew some of them by name. Tim would turn to me and say, "Oh, I got Camaro Z28 again. I'm gonna kill him. Again." The player base was small. Very small. So small that the servers, which hosted all of the game's online functionality, were shut down less than 2 years after the game's launch. Remember that bittersweet ending I mentioned regarding the journey to the Platinum Trophy? I remember reading the message board post informing all of us hardcores that the EA MMA plug was getting pulled. There were posts from players and developers going back and forth, and I'll never forget reading the words. From now until our final day of operation, April 13th, 2012, we're instituting 10 times XP. Go and get those platinums. It was like he was speaking directly to Tim and I. We had badgered this poor guy for a year, busting balls about this ridiculously long grinding process, and obviously, it made an impact on him. He knew we wouldn't have time to see the journey to its end, so he stepped in and made a difference. He made it possible for us. That is something I'll truly never forget. If you're watching this video, dude, thank you. That was a big deal to us. And that EA MMA Platinum Trophy, which I earned on October 1st, 2011, is still the rarest trophy in my collection of nearly 7,000. Thanks to online databases like psnprofiles.com, it's cataloged forever that I was just the 20th person in the world to earn that trophy. 0.1% of all players have this one in their collection, and with the servers having been shut down for nearly 10 years now, this is an extremely exclusive club that is no longer joinable. God damn. What a journey. EA Sports MMA, at the end of the day, was a commercial failure. The game sold very, very poorly. It reviewed well, and to the hardcores out there, like myself, it's still held in high regard. I'll never forget standing in line at GameStop at midnight. There were maybe 35, 40 people lined all the way out onto the sidewalk to pick up their pre-order of Fallout New Vegas. There were stacks behind the counter of PS3 and 360 copies of New Vegas. You'd walk up to the cashier, they'd reach out for your pre-order receipt while asking, 360 or PS3? You got your game and went home looking forward to a brand new adventure in the war-torn, post-apocalyptic world of Fallout. When it was my turn at the counter, the cashier asked, PS3 or 360? I replied, EA MMA. Behind the skyscraper-esque towers of Fallout, there sat my lone PlayStation 3 copy of EA Sports MMA. I grabbed my game and went home, looking forward to a brand new adventure in the Strikeforce cage, the Japanese ring, and the high-octane world of mixed martial arts. It is worth noting that in December of 2010, 2 months after EA MMA's abysmal launch, EA Sports Associate Editor Jeff Ecker confirmed to Figure 4 Online, and I quote, "There is definitely going to be an EA Sports MMA 2. In some ways, this was a lie. In others, it wasn't. On June 17th, 2014, MMA gamers were treated to the release of EA Sports UFC. And after all that talk, after declaring war on EA Sports in 2009 and threatening to blacklist any UFC fighter who signed over their likeness, UFC President Dana White was included as a playable fighter in EA Sports UFC 3, forever proving that time and lots of money heals all wounds. Oh my goodness gracious, Dan-Dans, there it is. The life and death of EA Sports MMA. You know, there are very few games out there that I can say I was there on day one, and I stood on the deck of that ship, saluting the skies as we sank down to the abyss. EA Sports MMA holds a very special place for me, and this is a retrospective that I've wanted to make for a long time. Oh man, I am so happy to have those memories, and I'm so happy to have shared those memories with all of you. You know what's really cool is that 3 of the biggest names behind the development of EA Sports MMA actually saw that video, reached out to me, and joined me here on the channel for an interview that went nearly 2.5 hours long. Shout out to Nick, Preston, and Jason. Link in the description if you'd like to check out that interview after this. These guys have stories for days. Stories that include tracking dog shit into Randy Couture's house. I'm not kidding. Passion. That's what EA Sports MMA had. Now sure, it was a financial failure, but that happens. Not all of the best things draw the most money. Fight Club was a financial failure. The Iron Giant was a theatrical bomb. These things happen. Our third and final topic here on the history of UFC video games, part 4, doesn't exactly fall into that category. Supremacy MMA was released in June of 2011. Developed by Kung Fu Factory, the team behind Mortal Kombat Unchained on the PSP, and even the Wii port of Mortal Kombat Armageddon, it should be no surprise that this title brings the pain. The realistic sports simulations of Undisputed and EA Sports MMA are outta here, mister. In place of realism and a professional atmosphere are dark, dingy, dirty cages with barbed wire around the top. There's no Brock Lesnar, no Randy Couture, no Fedor Emelianenko. Instead, there's Jack Saxon and Pierre Matisse. If you're a fight fan and you're confused, it's because Jack Saxon is actually Brent Cooper. Pierre Matisse is played by kickboxing star Joe Schilling. Why are these fighters using fake names? Who knows? It could have something to do with the supremacy stories, which are not tales of white nationalist conquest, despite how it may sound. No, they're multi-part arcade ladders. More on that later. The fighters playing characters for the story theory doesn't really hold up when Jerome LeBanner and Jens Pulver are here, and they're just themselves. I don't know, Dan-Dans. I don't know. What I do know is this. Supremacy MMA is an awful, awful game. Why is the game awful, you ask? How is it awful? I'm glad you posed those questions, and I'll do my absolute best to put it into words. To put it bluntly, the buttons just don't do what they're supposed to do. Half the time when you try to walk, your feet just stay put, like you're glued to the floor. The striking... Okay, hold on. I played through the tutorial before jumping headlong into gameplay because I wanted to have some semblance of an idea how to control my fighter. This might be the worst tutorial I have ever seen in my life. They'll throw a prompt at you, and whether you actually clear the lesson or not, they'll just throw another one at you. Look at this. Press circle right before you hit the ground to soften your blow. Okay. Is this guy going to... Is he gonna knock me down so that I can try that? No? Okay. So what do I do? Oh, I guess I'll just do this now. Supremacy MMA might honestly be the worst PlayStation 3 game I've ever played. I'm serious. Why is it that executing a submission move doesn't end a fight? It just hurts. Why did I let go of the hold? Why would I not crank it harder? Oh man, getting an opponent to the ground and unleashing punches practically means you've won the fight. It takes forever to drain your opponent's health, but I'd say 94% of the time, they won't even make an attempt to stand up or even change their position on the ground. Look at this. It's comical. Supremacy Stories, the terribly named story mode we touched on earlier, has us stepping into the shoes of a fighter of our choosing and playing through their story. And I'm being generous with that explanation. The only story comes from these cheap-looking, flat, repetitive motion comics. This game does have a feature not found in any MMA game since Sudden Impact, though. It's got female fighters. Supremacy MMA touts its female fighters right on the box art. Kung Fu Factory were extremely proud to feature so many women in an MMA game. Every female fighter even has their own Supremacy story. All 2 of them. Yeah, that's it. Felice Herrig and Michelle Gutierrez. Their story modes, as you might imagine, are just them fighting each other. Look at the intro to Michelle's story. It's dark and fucked up, but I cannot help but laugh at it.
Did I mention I was just coming out of a divorce? Yeah, that happened. Also, this was the same year my mother died of cancer.
Jesus Christ. If there's one other thing that'll have you saying Jesus Christ, it's the fact that this game celebrates the athletes suffering horrific injuries. The main selling point for Supremacy MMA was the idea that you can break your opponent's bones. Kicks can literally break your opponent's leg in half at the knee, effectively ending their entire career. A joint lock to end a fight can snap an arm like a twig. Look, Supremacy MMA is the type of game to say anything's possible in the cage. Meanwhile, Jens Pulver is listed as a boxer, meaning he cannot throw kicks at all. Anything is possible, except for, like, most things. You know what this game is? Supremacy MMA is the backyard wrestling of mixed martial arts video games. That's the perfect analogy for it. And over-promising, under-delivering, hey, that's kind of cool on paper, but, oh, it's dog shit in practice, idea that probably shouldn't have even been released in the first place. It should be no shocker that Supremacy MMA reviewed terribly and sold even worse. I mean, you're not shocked by that, are you? You can't be. Can you believe that this has a PlayStation Vita port? I love the Vita. I've been a Vita Island resident since day one, and it hurts me that Supremacy MMA is the only mixed martial arts game on the platform. Some may ask why I'm not covering 2012's Bellator MMA Onslaught in this video. Because Bellator, at a certain point, became the #2 MMA promotion in the world. Well, I'm not covering it because Onslaught was developed by Kung Fu Factory and is pretty much just a reskin of Supremacy MMA. If you can believe it, it has even fewer arenas and only 8 fighters in the entire game. 8. Single digits. Yeah, we won't be wasting any time on this. I will quickly put over the World of Mixed Martial Arts series, though. A text-based, PC-exclusive sim that allows the player to run their own company, sign talent, put together pay-per-view deals, book fights. Basically, you can be the Dana White of your own promotion. I've probably sunk more than 1,000 hours into this series. I'm not kidding. It's one of my all-time favorite video games. Seriously, it's about as nerdy as it gets, but hey, that's the real deal. When it comes to mixed martial arts video games outside of the UFC, we've got a pretty good deal of variety. Pride FC was damn fun when it came out, with a level of presentation that was ahead of its time. EA Sports MMA, for me, is still a blast. There are features in EA MMA that I wish would be present in the upcoming UFC 5. That's how much I love that game. And Supremacy MMA, oh boy. I mean, there has to be a worst in every category, right? Well, in Supremacy MMA, we found our rock bottom. Oh, there it is, Dan Dans. Thank you for joining me for the History of UFC Video Games Part 4, Uncaged Competition. Next time out, we wrap things up with the History of UFC Video Games Part 5, Changing the Game, where we are going to go deep on the EA Sports branded UFC titles. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, please consider supporting me over on patreon.com/616entertainment. I'm a one-man crew. I write these scripts, I shoot these videos, I edit these videos, I upload them. It's all me. And if you want to support a one-man crew, Patreon is the place to do it. Thank you very much. Until next time, I love ya, and I'll see you soon. After a trilogy of games with THQ and Yukes, the UFC made a deal with the devil. I mean, that's how UFC President Dana White would have made it seem. After years and years of publicly burying EA Sports to anyone who would listen, he'd put pen to paper with the sports game giant in mid-2012, guaranteeing that future UFC video games would not fall out of those championship rankings. Today, we're going to look at the Ultimate Fighting Championship titles released under EA Sports. The good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. Welcome to the final installment. This is the History of UFC Video Games Part 5, Changing the Game. Oh, what's up, Dan Dans? My name is Ian, and man, oh man, can you believe we're closing out another History of already? Now, if you missed it, I already announced the 2024 series, which is going to be the history of Friday the 13th. So if you like my written, scripted, in-depth retrospectives, don't worry, there's plenty more to come on that front. And when this video is over, if you liked it, maybe if you like my other stuff and you want to support me, you can over on patreon.com/616entertainment. I could really use you in my corner, so if you want to, go for it. If you don't, hey, that's your business. My business is wrapping up this series, so let's get to it. Much like 2010's EA Sports MMA, which I covered in part 4 of this series, in case you missed it, it's worth taking a closer look at the actual development of the first UFC game under EA Sports. You know the drill by now. EA Sports isn't just one company. Here with the inaugural Ultimate Fighting Championship game, EA Vancouver, aka EA Black Box, co-developed this title in tandem with Skylabs. EA Vancouver are known for the FIFA series, NHL, the entirety of the Skate franchise, and, wouldn't you know it, Fight Night. More on this series later. You might know Skylabs for their work on ports of games like Minecraft, or their hand in developing Halo Infinite. Not quite the crazy resume of EA Vancouver / Black Box, but hey, it was a tag team effort nonetheless. My hype level, as you might imagine, was higher than Nick Diaz in the cage with Anderson Silva. I'm a massive MMA fan. I loved UFC Undisputed 3, and now a brand new start under the umbrella that delivers the top tier sports game selections. Yeah, I was in. Look, I know it's really easy to say EA is trash. It's really easy to call them bullshit, lame, crooks, whatever you want to call them. It's easy. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes the accusation that they copy and paste practically the same game year after year fits. Sometimes. But here's the thing. I don't buy the games every year. I mean, honestly, I don't buy the games at all, outside of UFC. The last Madden I bought was Madden 2004, and I paid $4.99 for it right when Madden 2005 dropped. The Fight Night series never disappointed me. So I'm not about to pretend that EA are garbage across the board. That sort of stance is ignorant, whether you like it or not. It's perfectly okay to not pick up every new entry. Keep that in mind for later. Specifically with the UFC, this was the first entry. There was no possibility of a copy and paste job, as there was nothing to copy and paste. We were getting something fresh no matter what. But could it possibly stand up to Undisputed 3? Could it match EA Sports MMA? This new game, delivered with the extremely creative title EA Sports UFC, was revealed at E3 in 2012. The tomato himself was all smiles, telling fans that finally the UFC video games could make their way to everyone around the world. As if the Undisputed series didn't sell millions of copies in its own right. Whatever. The stage was set. EA Sports and the UFC had finally come together. Now, would this be a WWF sort of situation where we said goodbye to the war zones and attitudes of the world in order to welcome in the SmackDowns and No Mercies, which is arguably the greatest upgrade in video game history? Or would this be more of a WCW type scenario where we said goodbye to Revenge in order to say hello to Backstage Assault? There's only one way to find out, and that's to take a close look at the gameplay. The first thing you're going to notice is that EA Sports UFC looks good. Damn good. We've graduated to the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One at this point, and I don't know about you, but I'm pretty blown away by how well this has held up. Sure, it's only been 9 years, but I've played many late life cycle PS4 games that didn't have character models nearly this nice. The presentation is great, specifically in the career mode, which, for the first time, includes the Ultimate Fighter. Why did it take 9 years for a UFC game to feature the reality show that changed the company's fortunes forever? Who knows? Honestly, I have no idea. You'd think this would have been a no-brainer from day one, but hey, it's finally here. It does come at a cost, though, and by that I mean Pride Mode is gone. And spoiler, it never came back. To this very day. One of the main talking points developers pushed heading up to release surrounded the body deformation system. For example, punch your opponent in the midsection and watch the impact ripple through their torso. Pretty damn cool. Remember when Showtime Anthony Pettis ran up the wall at the final WEC show and hit Ben Henderson with the greatest kick in combat sports history? Well, you can nail the Showtime kick here in the game. The knockout animations range from brutal to dramatic to recycled from the Fight Night games?
Get away! Get away from a fan!
Oh!
Am I dead?
Yeah.
Is he dead?
I myrtleized you.
Fuck!
Yeah, they are. Put them side by side. These walk back and faceplant animations look terrible, and they don't belong in a simulation-style sports game at all. And now that we've crossed over into the negative territory, I do have a few things to get off my chest. You might be thinking, man, this looks like Rock'em Sock'em Robots, and yeah, it is. I remember my first fight. I found myself wondering what the hell was happening. After the heavy, impactful strikes of Undisputed 3, this game's striking feels... I mean, I'm not trying to sell the game to you, I'm being honest. It feels like shit. Jabs, crosses, leg kicks, body kicks, they all feel absolutely worthless. Power punches like hooks don't feel much better.
Flying knee attempt there, and a nice 1-2 with the right and the left.
And all strikes come with a feeling of wearing concrete boots. When you're not bolted to the floor, though, you can expect many of your fights to look like this.
Opponent does not watch his arms. He will throw up multiple submission attempts. Strong kicks by Pettis.
Why the hell do I have to hold backwards on the stick to throw a head kick? Why does any forward advancing strike require the stick to be pulled in the opposite direction? You can block with the R2 button, but you can heavy block with R2 and square, or X. Is that overkill? Yes, it is. It's completely worthless. There's a parrying mechanic that comically bends a strike around your head like this is the Matrix, And when competing against the AI on higher difficulties, it can sometimes feel impossible to land a strike as they parry every shot that comes their way. Very annoying. I feel like it's worth mentioning that the EA Sports deal wasn't the only major come-up for the Ultimate Fighting Championship. On television, the days of Spike TV were far in the rearview mirror. In August of 2011, the UFC signed a deal with Fox to broadcast fights on the main Fox network station, Fox Sports 1, and FX. Is it funny that the UFC's first event on Fox was a gigantic heavyweight championship fight between Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos? A one-fight TV card that lasted literally 64 seconds? Yeah, that's a little funny. I don't know what the hell they thought was going to happen. Basing an entire television broadcast around a singular fight is a mistake they never made again, but hey, you live and learn. The point I'm trying to make is that the UFC, once again, had reached a new level of fame, a new level of popularity, and a new level of competition. This time, with female fighters. I know you don't want a full history lesson on anything tied to the real world. You're here for video game coverage, so that's what I'll focus on. For the first time ever, not including guest character Erica Montoya from the PlayStation 2 days, we've got an entire division's worth of female fighters. Ronda Rousey, Holly Holm, Miesha Tate, and more are here mixing it up with the boys, which is awesome to see.
Watch for that head kick again.
Big front kick to the face.
Powerful hook.
Oh, look.
It's over.
That's it. She's out. Oh, wow.
Like
What a knockout.
Miesha Tate wins by knockout.
And on the topic of fantastic first-time inclusions, you can't expect me to gloss over Bruce Lee, right? Enter the Dragon? How about Enter the Octagon?
The strong kick.
God damn, this is sick. Bruce Lee is one of the fighters who often suffers from a strange bug, though, where right at the beginning of a round, he switches stances several times with no input from the player at all. I have no idea why this occurs. And speaking of weird annoyances, what the hell happened to Anderson Silva's gear? The Spider is known for his black and yellow shorts. He wore them in literally every UFC fight across his entire career, aside from when the Reebok deal was new and no one was allowed to wear anything fun. So where are they? Was it a copyright issue? I doubt it. Such a strange oversight. I covered that Pride mode, unfortunately, is gone. And if you're wondering what replaced it, don't, because it wasn't replaced by anything. Maybe you're asking what there is to do besides career mode, ranked online play, or quick fights from the main menu, and I can answer that question with one word. Nothing. The first entry in any franchise is always the foundation, you know? The building blocks that would be iterated on with each subsequent sequel. EA Sports UFC definitely falls into that category. But make no mistake, I didn't bounce off this game in 10 hours. I didn't run through a career mode and go, okay, that was enough. Somehow, this is still in my top 3 most played games across my entire PSN account. So I don't know how. It's all a blur at this point, but that's accurate. You know, this might not be the best, but sometimes you'll take what you can get if you're a big enough fan. EA Sports UFC released on June 17th, 2014. And the review scores didn't exactly set the world on fire. I think it's fair to say that most critics were left unimpressed with the weightless, consequence-free, rock'em sock'em action. When it comes to the dollars and cents, you might be surprised to learn that this EA Sports entry actually didn't sell as well as THQ's Undisputed 3, which only compounds the disappointment. Coming off UFC Undisputed 3 made it hard enough to live up to the hype. But if you're really in the know, there's another reason to be annoyed by an underwhelming new game. EA Sports UFC took the place of the Fight Night boxing franchise, as EA themselves found the business of mixed martial arts to be more financially interesting than boxing. I promise I won't bring it up again across this video, but here's one last remark. Fight Night Champion, released in 2011. here we are, nearly 13 years later, and the EA Sports UFC franchise is still being made in place of Fight Night. To say I'm annoyed with this would be an understatement. But that's that on that. You won't hear me talk about Fight Night for the rest of this video, which is great, considering we have several more UFC games to cover here today. When it comes to sports games, there's a pretty common template, right? The annual release. With the Ultimate Fighting Championship license, though, EA Sports broke the traditional mold. The sequel to their 2014 introductory installment wouldn't launch the following year, and instead would hit store shelves in March of 2016. This is a good thing for consumers, and you know what I mean by that, don't you? You and I. We're the consumers, and with a biannual release, we are being pressured to hand over $60 to $70 half as often as fans of other sports, which, hey man, I'll take it. But the year-long break between releases actually comes with a fair amount of pressure as well. You know, Madden's copy and paste accusations are slightly understandable when you really dial it in and take a look at how small of a window the developers have to create the product. Launching every other year tells the consumer, hey, we've had more time to work. We've actually had time to zoom in on all of the mechanics and all of the turning gears. We've identified what works, what needs to be fixed, what needs to be cut out entirely. And when the time comes to ship, you better bring the heat. Otherwise, what the hell was I waiting for? So what's new? What has EA Sports added to UFC 2 in order to justify the extended development cycle? First off, there's Ultimate Team Mode. You know how other EA Sports titles like Madden and FIFA have these card collecting gameplay modes where you build up your ultimate best team or whatever? They tried to do the same thing here. I gotta be honest, nothing in the world sounds less interesting to me personally, so I have never even once engaged with this mode, and now the servers are shut down, so I can't even get any capture of it to tell you about it. Does anybody really care? I doubt it, seeing as though future EA Sports UFC sequels drop this mode, with the developers citing a lack of interest from the player base as their cause. Moving on, we've got Knockout Mode. These UFC games are really complicated. Many players engage with these titles for hundreds of hours and never learn how to grapple. Knockout Mode is for those players. It's a stand-up specific, health bar based, arcadey good time. You know I'm a sucker for an event mode, or if you're a wrestling game fan, maybe you'd call it create a pay-per-view. It's nice to have this here, but it's practically empty. It's just a list of fights. None of the bells and whistles that Undisputed had for this mode are here at all, which I don't think there's any excuse for. So we've got new game modes, one of which I think is a major positive. What else? Well, this is most importantly. The gameplay has indeed been reworked. Jabs and crosses now carry impact and are perfect for stopping an incoming opponent or setting up a power shot. Leg kicks are delivered with more weight as well, and the same can be said for strikes to the body. There are far fewer of these moments, because many of these wacky moves have been removed, or at the very least, toned down. I didn't go into UFC 1's grappling system because it was largely pulled over straight from Undisputed, but UFC 2 has ditched the quarter circle transition system for a brand new mechanic, where all you need to do is hold the right stick in one direction and fill a wheel, which is much more intuitive. And not for nothing, we have to talk about the knockouts. I guess I shouldn't even call them animations, because these are not canned by the numbers repeated movements anymore. Now, the momentum of the strike delivered determines how your body hits the canvas. This can make for some of the most natural and devastating KOs you've ever seen in your life.
Using this jab very well. She's got a cut on the bridge of her nose. Oh, and another jab. Oh, my goodness. Look at the good jab. Wow, what a back and forth exchange. Oh, wow, another big jab score. Oh, and he's down again. Here. Wow. Forces opponent. Oh, he caught with a big punch. Wow. Damaging left hand. Oh, that's it. He's out. He's out. Wow.
It can also create some hilarious, over-the-top ones as well, if the physics are feeling a little froggy. There are hundreds of compilations on YouTube of crazy UFC 2 KOs. I highly recommend checking a few of them out. One of my favorite things to do in these games is to pick a fighter and play out a what-if sort of scenario with their career trajectory. Chuck Liddell is one of my all-timers, and it's widely known at the tail end of his career, he couldn't take a shot like he used to. At UFC 88, the Iceman was knocked out cold for the first time in his career by the surging Rashad Evans, who would win the light heavyweight championship in his very next fight. Chuck Liddell would suffer 2 more straight knockout losses before retiring at the age of 41. I like to shake things up. I'll pick Chuck Liddell and I'll play against a Rashad Evans on the highest difficulty to see if I can change his fate. If I win, what would have made sense next? Maybe a title shot? Or maybe Iron Mike fucking Tyson. Yeah, see, that's the other fun thing to do here, if you have a little imagination. Mess around with the guest characters. Joining Bruce Lee this time out, we've indeed got Mike Tyson. 2 different eras of Tyson, actually. As well as Pride Fighting Championships legend Kazushi Sakuraba, and fellow UFC Hall of Famer El Guapo, Boss Rutan.
Everybody underestimates the kick in the groin. Dang. And look what we got here. Smack his face.
Pairing the legends of a bygone era with today's athletes can make for a damn good time, let me tell you. And with a roster of over 250 fighters in this game, there's no shortage of potential matchups. Career mode was slightly improved with a list of opponents now presented to us, and we get to choose which fight we want to take. Training segments were streamlined and pared down, but outside of that, there's not much to speak of. The same way event mode lacks any and all flavor, career mode is pretty much the same. There are no weigh-ins, no interviews. Joe Rogan's not going to hop in the cage after a title fight and ask you how you're feeling. It's just menus and fights. I do have a few issues I'd like to spend some time on, if you don't mind. I've found across my 112 hours playing this game, accurate number, that my fights never end out of the blue. One of the greatest, most exciting aspects of combat sports is that anything can happen at any time. In UFC 2, that's not the case. I cannot recall a single instance where, in the opening moments, I threw a perfect punch that slapped my opponent with one shot. It just doesn't happen. It's like there's a Mortal Kombat health bar that we can't see. Now you gotta build combos and hit special moves. You can't one-shot anybody in Mortal Kombat, right? But this isn't Mortal Kombat. I should be able to stiffen somebody with a perfect sniper shot, damn it. The ground and pound finishes look like shit. It's so hitchy and abnormal looking. There's zero flow. This is not how human beings move. The 2-year development cycle paid dividends in the end, as EA Sports UFC 2 did indeed outsell the original. Not only that, but the review scores came in higher than last time as well. I mean, most of them did. IGN's John Robertson scored UFC 2 lower than the previous title. Granted, John Robertson didn't write the review for the original, but still, putting 2 below 1 is criminally insane, as 1 isn't a better product in literally any way whatsoever. But hey, we all know that. And we all know that review scores are just one person's opinion. We shouldn't get hung up on it, even when it seems like maybe the person has no idea what they're talking about. UFC 2 was a step in the right direction, which begged the question, could UFC 3 continue to raise the bar? Or would this rising contender get knocked out before its title shot? Here's the thing. I'm not going to cook this into some big reveal. I'm not going to dangle that carrot and try to get you to guess whether or not I like UFC 3. I'll reveal it right here at the very top. For my money, up to this point, EA Sports UFC 3 took the title. Yes, indeed. In my personal opinion, this was the new greatest mixed martial arts video game ever made. Now, that's a bold claim. I understand that. What makes this better than UFC 2? What makes it better than EA Sports MMA? How could this be better than Undisputed 3? All great questions, and I'm more than happy to respond. First and foremost, Snoop Dogg now commentates knockout mode.
See, you gotta watch your stamina, dog. You gonna get knocked out. Oh, wow. No! Damn, he slept him quick. I need to call him NyQuil. He wasn't paying attention. He just was swinging wild, and then he got caught, and then his bars went down. Oh, he might have broke his... Something broke. Woo! I like that kick. Look at your health bars. Look, back up, man. Oh, man, stop the press. Stop the press. Stop the press.
Is that awesome? Yes. Yes, it is. But that's not the only reason UFC 3 became the new pound-for-pound king. You might have picked up from the gameplay clips you just saw that the striking controls haven't been given a slight facelift. No. The entire head was chopped off and replaced with a better one. Is that a strange way to word this? Maybe. Look, what I'm saying is this. For the first time ever, we can walk and strike at the same time. How did it take so long for this to become a reality? I have no idea, but man, oh man, is this a gigantic leap that mixed martial arts games needed. Remember how I said UFC 1 felt like we were wearing concrete boots, and UFC 2 was slightly better? Going from those into UFC 3 is like going from a speak and spell to an iPad. And if that's too dated of a reference for you, it's like going from a Game Boy to an OLED Switch. How do you like that? Was that better? This wasn't just a new idea implemented into the game's mechanics. No. What we're looking at is the first use of RPM tech, a brand new game engine designed to better represent human locomotion. God damn, I'll take it. Head movement has been greatly improved as well, now simplified and tied to the right analog stick. Swaying out of the way and answering back with a counter-strike has never felt better. If you frequent this channel, you've heard me say probably hundreds of times at this point that I don't really play games online. I don't usually engage with multiplayer at all. Spider-Man, The Last of Us, Octopath Traveler, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, these are my types of games. But UFC 3, with its buttery smooth striking and its intuitive grappling, it was calling to me for some reason. I kind of got the itch to see what it would be like to face other real players. So I checked out an online ranked fight, and I won by devastating knockout. And let me tell you, I found out very quickly how good it feels to beat somebody else. I've played shooters online like Killzone or Resistance back in like 2008. I don't really find it that interesting. It's fun for a few minutes, but it's not engaging for me at all. But stepping into the cage with a game plan and trying to figure out how the other guy across from me works, oh man, it's got the pull. This was actually the first time that I've ever felt even the slightest itch of a video game addiction. Now, listen, let me make this clear. I've watched many documentaries on people who got addicted to World of Warcraft, people who ruined their lives. They lost their house, they lost their job, their families left them. What I experienced is nothing even close to that, don't worry. UFC 3 just gave me the feeling of not wanting to put the game down, and I'll tell you why. Winning a fight felt great, and if I won, I felt like I was on a roll. Eventually I'd get knocked out horribly, and it's like, well, I don't want to end on a loss, right? So I'd play again. And if I lost again, well, I still need that win. But if I win, I mean, now I'm on another roll. It's a problem, Dan-Dans. I had to set rules for myself. If I didn't have everything I needed done for the day, I wasn't allowed to play online. Because if I turned that game on, I wasn't just going to have a fight or two. The pull was real, Dan-Dans. The pull was real. Beware. Career mode was marketed this time out as being largely overhauled. Become the greatest of all time. That's the goal. This can be accomplished by sharing training updates on social media, by hyping your upcoming fights through interviews and whatnot, but the matchmaking still sucks. The matchmaking has largely sucked across this entire series, and here in the third entry, it's no longer excusable. Fighting the same guys 5 and 6 times is unacceptable, and it occurs in practically every career playthrough you experience. I honestly think UFC 3's matchmaking is the worst yet. I've won the title, lost it, gone on a winning streak, and for whatever reason, I never get another title shot. Eventually I lose, like anyone would, which kills all my momentum, and what happens next? I get a title shot. What? Why? Coming off a loss? So now I'm sitting here trying to come up with a storyline in my head to make sense of this trash. I hate this. It's also annoying that, much like Undisputed 3, we start our career in the WFA and we have to earn a UFC contract. Cool, that's fine. My question is this: why is the WFA arena only accessible in career mode? Why can't I use this cage in fight now mode or knockout mode? Come on, man. You give us practically zero visual variety across the entire game, and this is hidden away only in career mode. Bullshit. Competing in the ranks of special guest characters this time out, let's take a look at UFC President Dana White. It's still so funny to see Dana in an EA Sports game. After all the shit he talked over the years, man, money heals all wounds, doesn't it? But Dana's not alone. If you really want to get nuts, take Joe Rogan into the octagon. Hell, have him fight Dana White.
Kick to the body. He's hurt. Oh, he hurt him bad. Oh, that's it. Wow.
In what I think is really a head-scratching decision, Andre Bishop and Isaac Frost were included as playable characters here in UFC 3. If you don't recognize these guys, it's because they're not like Bruce Lee and Mike Tyson. These guys aren't real people. Andre Bishop and Isaac Frost are the one-off arch enemies from Fight Night Champion, a game released 7 years prior. Where the hell did this come from? I mean, it's cool, I'll take it. Isaac Frost is enormous, but what the hell? CM Punk isn't a guest character, as he was an active UFC fighter and competed in the cage twice, at UFC 203 and UFC 225. But it still feels like a fever dream to see him here sometimes, right? As a big Punk fan myself, I like that I can take it upon myself to see him get his hand raised in the octagon. Ultimate Team Mode returned this time out and was lambasted by critics for becoming a microtransaction nightmare, and I mean, what do you expect? This is EA Sports we're talking about. Remember at the top when I said sometimes EA are guilty of the accusations thrown their way? Here you go. But game developers pack their games with microtransactions because people pay for them by the tens of millions. If everyone would stop spending their money on this bullshit, we'd stop getting games structured around this system. How much money did I spend on Ultimate Team Mode? $0, because I still haven't ever engaged with this at all. I still have no idea how any of this works, so I'm sorry I still can't tell you about it, I guess. I can't tell you anything about it. And I'm actually not sorry, I take that back. Not only do I like to play out what-if career reruns with some of my favorite fighters, but I take it a step further. If I'm playing as Anderson Silva, I try my best to fight like Anderson Silva. Now, can I mimic him perfectly? Absolutely not, because my brain doesn't work the way the spider's does. Even in the digital realm, when I don't have to worry about getting punched in the face, I just don't have the instincts. But I try my best. I will taunt, I'll throw wacky strikes. If I knock you down, I'm not going to go for the finish. I'm going to say get up and I'm going to do it again. Oh man. It's kind of like role-playing in a way, isn't it? If you approach even a sports game with just a little bit of imagination, there's some extra fun to be had there. February 2nd, 2018. That was the day EA Sports UFC 3 hit store shelves, and once again, the reviews were looking good. Critics and players alike were over the moon about the reworked striking system, and again, Snoop Dogg does commentary in Knockouts mode. Are you kidding? Unfortunately, UFC 3 didn't sell as well as UFC 2. It actually didn't even crack the sales figures of UFC 1, but I don't think that's the fault of the game itself. I don't even think EA Sports is to blame. At the time, business was down for the Ultimate Fighting Championship as a whole. In 2017, the promotion pulled in an annual revenue of $750 million, the highest in company history. Across 2018, the year UFC 3 launched, revenue dropped to $690 million. Now, obviously, $690 million isn't chump change. I can make sure I and all of my friends live out our entire lives comfortably with a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of that amount of money, you know? But the numbers are the numbers. And we couldn't have known at the time, but the UFC was on its last legs. The company would shut down just 1 year later, citing a loss of... No, obviously I'm kidding. In October of 2018, just 8 months after UFC 3's launch, the company would pull their biggest pay-per-view buy rate of all time, with UFC 229, Khabib vs. McGregor. 2 years later, in October of 2020, EA Sports UFC 4 would go on to become the best-selling UFC video game of all time. And I'm not going to talk about it. You might ask why, and really the answer is simple. I didn't buy it. Let me reword that. I refused to buy it. Again, sometimes the criticism levied at EA is accurate. After UFC 3, I knew exactly what I wanted out of a sequel. First and foremost, I wanted a better career mode with sensical matchmaking. Give me that Fight Night Round 4 option of showing me every available fighter across the rankings and let me decide who I want to fight, how I want to train, how long I want to train for. All of that. Fight Night Round 4 came out in 2009. Don't tell me you can't just do it again. That's really it. That's all I needed. Better career mode. And what did we get? We got boxers Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, which is fine. Did the highly requested Pride mode come back? No. We got Kumite, a fantasy underground Bloodsport style gameplay mode that nobody asked for. We got a microtransaction nightmare of an online landscape where you could pay real money to dress like a clown or a werewolf or a fucking something else stupid. I didn't like the way it looked, and when there was a closed beta, I got in. I was at least willing to check it out in this environment, and I hated it. They'd fucked with the striking controls, and they fucked with the grappling controls, and honestly, it felt like shit to play. I wanted one thing, and they didn't give it to me. They loaded the latest sequel up with new, exciting opportunities for me to hand over as much money as possible, and so I opted out completely. Outside of that closed beta, I have never played a single fight in UFC 4. Sony gave away the game for free on PlayStation Plus, and out of sheer principle, I refused to play it even then. It was such a disappointment, Dan Dans. You look forward to something for years, your expectations are low, practically the bare minimum, and what's delivered can't even hit that mark. I come to you now to say it's okay to take a step back from things you love. It's okay to take a break, especially if the topic at hand is a product that you have to pay for. If something is not living up to your expectations, give it a break. More often than not, you will find that a break will pay dividends in the end. I skipped UFC 4 entirely, and wouldn't you know it, the UFC 5 development cycle actually lasted longer, with 3 entire years passing between the release of 4 and 5. Now you might be wondering, did I come back? Did I buy UFC 5? Yeah, I did, and it's fucking awesome. Online career mode is sick. Creating my own fighter and facing other custom fighters online where each win earns me points to improve my guy? Hell yeah. A career mode with the option to turn down fight offers if I don't like them? Hell yeah. Fedor Emelianenko in the octagon for the first time? Hell yeah. A new damage system with doctor stoppages for the first time in franchise history? Hell yeah. Players of UFC 4 have complained that this entry is too similar, gameplay-wise, that they feel like there wasn't a big enough leap between sequels, and to that I say, it's okay to walk away. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to not throw your money at something if it's not up to your standards. And trust me, that time away will pay dividends. I've been an MMA fan since 2004. I was blessed to fall so deeply in love with the sport when I did, able to witness the entire career of Anderson Silva. I've been here for the birth of women's MMA. I was there in the arena when all-time greats Fedor Emelianenko and Dan Henderson went to war in 2011. I was in the arena when Chael Sonnen beat Michael Bisping to earn his rematch against Anderson Silva. I was there in the arena for Frank Mir's fight with Fedor in 2018. I've hosted hundreds of UFC hangouts with my friends where copious amounts of pizza and other assorted junk food were consumed. Some of my favorite memories with my dad are tied to watching UFC pay-per-views together, man. Look, I still have the tapes from when my dad worked overnights and wasn't here or wasn't awake for the event. I would record it so that he could see it when he got home. Great memories, Dans. The history of UFC video games. While it wasn't always a top-tier experience, I would say there's definitely more highs than lows. Sometimes we're getting choked out. Other times we're scoring that big KO. I hope you guys have enjoyed this series as much as I have. Oh, there it is, Dans. The history of UFC video games, Part 5, Changing the Game. And I already announced next year it's the history of Friday the 13th. Don't miss it. And that's quite a leap, isn't it? From UFC video games over to Jason Voorhees and Friday the 13th. I mean, Jason did uppercut that boxer's head off one time. That's almost relatable. Dans, I love you. I appreciate you watching. If you appreciate this video, if you appreciate this channel, this series, maybe you want to support me over on patreon.com/616entertainment. I could really use you in my corner, and each new sign up brings us one step closer to a brand new retrospective. Thank you for watching. I love you, and I'll see you next time.